In this video, we're breaking down 2 hours of every Rick variant in Rick and Morty. Let's get started. First up, we got Rick C-137, the central Rick we followed throughout the series. Rick C-137 stands as the central figure viewers follow throughout the entire Rick and Morty series. He comes from a dimension designated C-137, which makes him different from nearly every other Rick in the multiverse. Unlike most versions of himself, Rick C-137 lived through an experience that changed everything about who he would become. His story forms the backbone of the show and explains why this particular Rick behaves the way he does. In Dimension C-137, Rick started out as a regular scientist. He lived a normal middle-class life with his wife Diane and their young daughter Beth. This Rick worked on teleportation technology in his garage, tinkering with inventions like any other scientist trying to make a breakthrough. He valued his family above everything else. This version of Rick chose his wife and daughter over scientific advancement, which separated him from almost every other Rick in existence. Most Ricks across the multiverse abandoned their families to pursue science and explore infinite dimensions. Rick C-137 made the opposite choice. Everything changed when another Rick appeared in his garage one day. This other Rick, who would later become known as Rick Prime, had already invented interdimensional travel. He came to Rick C-137, offering him the ability to travel between dimensions using portal technology. Rick Prime wanted Rick C-137 to join him in exploring the multiverse and abandoning his family life. Rick C-137 refused the offer. He told Rick Prime that he was content with his life, that he wanted to stay with Diane and Beth rather than chase adventures across infinite realities. This rejection made Rick Prime angry. He felt insulted that a version of himself would choose family over the godlike power of mastering the multiverse. Rick Prime responded to this rejection in the cruelest way possible. He sent a bomb through a portal into Rick C-137's garage. The bomb exploded while Diane and young Beth were there. Rick C-137 survived the blast, but his wife and daughter were killed instantly. Rick Prime murdered them out of spite, then fled into the multiverse. This single act of violence destroyed Rick C-137's life and set him on a path that would consume decades. The scientist who valued family over everything else lost the only people who mattered to him. The tragedy transformed him from a content family man into something much darker. After recovering from his physical wounds, Rick C-137 lived alone for some time. He grieved for Diane and Beth, struggling with the trauma of watching them die. Eventually, he decided to finish the portal gun technology on his own terms. Rick C-137 became one of only 2 Ricks in the entire multiverse to actually invent interdimensional travel himself. Rick Prime invented it first, but Rick C-137 figured it out independently after Rick Prime killed his family. Armed with this technology, Rick C-137 set out on a mission that would define the rest of his life. He began hunting for Rick Prime across infinite dimensions, determined to find the Rick who murdered his family and kill him. The hunt consumed everything. Rick C-137 developed a way to create a genetic identification system for Ricks. He traveled from dimension to dimension searching for Rick Prime. Along the way, he killed countless other Ricks. He murdered dozens, possibly hundreds, or even thousands of alternate versions of himself. Each time he found a Rick, he would check if that Rick matched the genetic signature of the one who killed Diane. None of them ever matched. Rick C-137 kept killing anyway, driven by rage and desperation. His appearance changed during this period. He started drinking heavily. He let himself go physically and emotionally. The passionate, determined scientist who began the hunt gradually transformed into a broken alcoholic who killed without hesitation. During his revenge quest, Rick C-137 also fought for a time in a rebellion against the Galactic Federation. He met allies like Birdperson and Squanchy while working with resistance forces, but even these friendships took a back seat to his hunt for Rick Prime. Eventually, Rick became disillusioned with the rebellion and walked away from it, returning to his search for the Rick who killed his family. The other Ricks across the multiverse noticed what Rick C-137 was doing. They saw this one, Rick traveling between dimensions and murdering their alternates. The Ricks began to unite against Rick C-137 as a common threat. They formed teams and sent groups after him to stop the killing spree. But Rick C-137 evaded them all and continued killing more Ricks in the process. Eventually, the conflict between Rick C-137 and the other Ricks reached a point where they had to negotiate. After Rick C-137 had killed a huge number of his counterparts and the other Ricks failed to stop him, they struck a peace deal. Rick C-137 agreed to help them in exchange for them leaving him alone. This agreement led directly to the creation of the Citadel of Ricks. Rick C-137 helped design and oversee the construction of an entire interdimensional city-state where Ricks and Mortys could live together. The Citadel existed as a place where Ricks could hide from their enemies across the galaxy, including the Galactic Federation. A council of Ricks formed to govern this society, though Rick C-137 never joined the council himself. He considered the entire concept hypocritical, since Ricks were forming a government to hide from other governments. The Citadel has existed for at least 15 years, which means it was built before the Morty viewers follow was even born. Rick C-137 founded this massive institution but wanted nothing to do with it afterward. He denounced the Citadel and refused to participate in its society. The Ricks who lived there developed complex systems, including schools to train Mortys, factories where they cloned new Mortys to give to Ricks whose Mortys had died, and an entire government structure. Rick C-137 viewed all of this as wrong, but he had helped create it as part of his deal to end the war between himself and the other Ricks. The Citadel became one of the most significant locations in the multiverse, a place where infinite versions of Rick and Morty lived and worked. But it all came about because Rick C-137 killed so many Ricks that the survivors had to band together for protection. After years of searching and never finding Rick Prime, Rick C-137 eventually gave up the active hunt. He was exhausted, broken, and had no leads on where Rick Prime had gone. Rick C-137 made a decision that would start the events viewers see in the show. He traveled to what is now called the Croninberg dimension, which was actually Rick Prime's original home dimension. Rick Prime had abandoned his own family in this dimension years earlier. Rick C-137 found this abandoned family and decided to take Rick Prime's place. He moved in with Rick Prime's Beth, who was now an adult. She had married Jerry Smith and they had 2 children named Summer and Morty. Rick C-137 told them he was their Rick returning after decades away. In reality, he was replacing Rick Prime, hoping that Rick Prime might eventually return to his original dimension. Rick C-137 planned to wait for his enemy to come home so he could finally get revenge. Rick Prime never came back because he had no attachment to his family. He was a sociopath who abandoned them without a second thought. Meanwhile, Rick C-137, despite his trauma and alcoholism, found himself becoming attached to this replacement family. He started to care about Rick Prime's Beth even though she was not his actual daughter. He bonded with the Morty, who was technically Rick Prime's grandson, not his own. Rick C-137 had entered this dimension as a trap for his enemy but ended up staying because these people filled some of the emptiness left by losing Diane and his real Beth. This dynamic sets up the core relationship of the entire series. The Morty viewers follow is not actually Rick C-137's grandson. Morty is Rick Prime's grandson, and Rick C-137 took his place as the grandfather figure in Morty's life. In the 6th episode of Season 1, Rick made a love potion for Morty to use on his crush Jessica at a school dance. The serum was derived from vole hormones. When Morty gave it to Jessica, who had the flu, the love potion bonded with the flu virus and went airborne. Within minutes, it spread across the entire planet. Everyone on Earth fell violently in love with Morty, except for people closely related to him like Jerry, Beth, and Summer. Rick tried to fix this mistake by creating an antidote. The antidote turned everyone into giant praying mantis creatures. Rick tried again with a 3rd serum made from various DNA sources. This final attempt cured people of wanting Morty, but mutated the entire human population into grotesque creatures. Rick called them Croninbergs, after the filmmaker David Cronenberg, who made movies about body horror. Rick realized the situation was beyond repair. Rather than try to fix it, he scanned the multiverse, looking for a dimension nearly identical to theirs, where an alternate Rick and Morty had successfully cured the virus, but then died immediately afterward. Rick found such a dimension. He and Morty traveled there, buried the dead versions of themselves in the backyard, and took their places. Rick walked away from the Croninberg world without trying to save it. He left Jerry, Beth, and Summer behind to survive in a world full of monsters. The episode ended with Morty visibly traumatized by having to bury his own corpse and abandon his original family. A post-credits scene showed Jerry, Beth, and Summer living out of an armored van in the ruined Croninberg world, admitting they were actually happier with Rick and Morty gone, despite everything falling apart around them. This dimension they moved to became known as Dimension C-131. Rick and Morty now lived in a different reality than where they started, though it was nearly identical to their original home. Only Morty truly understood what happened. He knew they had abandoned one reality and stolen the lives of their dead alternates. This event traumatized Morty and showed him the true scope of what traveling the multiverse meant. For Rick, it was just another solution to a problem. The ease with which Rick abandoned an entire dimension and replaced himself in another reality demonstrated his nihilistic worldview. To Rick, infinite realities meant infinite replacements. Nothing truly mattered if you could always find another version somewhere else. Throughout the series, Rick C-137 had multiple confrontations with the Citadel. In an episode called Close Rick Counters of the Rick Kind, the Council of Ricks accused Rick C-137 of murdering 27 other Ricks. They arrested him and brought him to the Citadel for trial. Rick escaped with help from Morty and other Mortys. Later, when the Galactic Federation captured Rick C-137, the Council of Ricks sent SEAL Team Ricks to assassinate him before he could reveal their secrets. Rick evaded the assassination attempt and escaped from Federation custody. In retaliation, he used the Federation's technology to teleport the entire Citadel into the middle of the Federation's main prison. The collision destroyed both structures. The Council of Ricks died in the chaos along with countless other Ricks, Mortys, and Federation prisoners. Rick C-137 used this disaster as a distraction to rescue Morty and Summer from the Citadel, then left the survivors to rebuild. The Citadel did survive and was reconstructed. After the Council's death, the Ricks and Mortys established a democratic system. They held elections for a new president. A Morty ran for president, promising equality between Ricks and Mortys. This Morty won the election, becoming the first Morty to lead the Citadel. But this Morty was actually Evil Morty, a super-intelligent version of Morty who had orchestrated the murder of 27 Ricks in the past. As president, Evil Morty immediately executed the Shadow Council that had been secretly controlling things. He consolidated absolute power and began working on a secret plan. Evil Morty wanted to escape what Rick C-137 had created, a section of the multiverse called the Central Finite Curve. The Central Finite Curve was a construct that Rick C-137 and the Citadel founders had built. It separated off a section of infinite realities where Rick was always the smartest person in the universe. Every dimension within the Central Finite Curve guaranteed that Rick would be the most intelligent being there. Evil Morty wanted to break through this barrier and reach dimensions where Rick was not the center of everything. In the Season 5 finale, Evil Morty completed his plan. He scanned Rick C-137's brain to get the information he needed. Then he destroyed the Citadel completely, killing most of the Ricks and Mortys living there. He used all the portal fluid in the Citadel to punch through the Central Finite Curve and escape into the larger multiverse beyond Rick's control. Rick C-137 and Morty barely escaped in a detached section called Mortytown before the Citadel exploded. This left them stranded without portal travel. Rick attempted to reset the portal index system to restore portal travel. Instead, he accidentally reset all portal travelers, sending every being who used portals back to their original dimension. Rick C-137 was sent back to Dimension C-137. Morty and Rick Prime were both sent to the Croninberg dimension since that was their original home. Rick C-137 found himself back in the destroyed dimension where he lost Diane and Beth. He discovered he had kept this entire dimension frozen in a time loop, trapping the inhabitants in the same day over and over for decades. Rick finally released the time loop, allowing everyone to experience time normally again, and presumably die since they had been frozen for so long. Meanwhile, Rick Prime returned to his original dimension for the first time in decades encountering and killing Jerry Prime before escaping again. Rick C-137 had been searching for Rick Prime for decades without success. In the Season 6 finale, Rick revealed he had secretly been tracking Rick Prime throughout the entire season using the reset that sent portal travelers home. But when Rick found Rick Prime's location, he discovered something terrifying. Rick Prime existed in hundreds of places simultaneously throughout the multiverse. The computer showed Rick Prime's location as being everywhere at once, meaning he had somehow achieved the ability to be in multiple dimensions at the same time. This made him nearly impossible to hunt down or kill. The revelation set up the final confrontation that would come in Season 7. In Season 7, Episode 5 titled Unmortrican, Rick and Morty disturbed Evil Morty while trying to track Rick Prime. Evil Morty was living peacefully in his own fortress after escaping the central finite curve. He was frustrated that Rick was messing with the multiverse again in his hunt for Rick Prime, but Evil Morty also showed unexpected compassion. He decided to help Rick and Morty find Rick Prime so everyone could move on with their lives. Evil Morty used his intelligence and resources to track down Rick Prime. They discovered Rick Prime had created something called the Omega Device, a weapon that could erase any individual from every dimension in existence while also interfering with people's memories of that person. Rick Prime had used this device on Diane, which explained why she had been absent from every dimension except Rick C-137's original timeline. Rick Prime had literally erased her from the multiverse. As punishment for Rick C-137's revenge quest, Evil Morty led Rick and Morty to Rick Prime's base. A violent battle erupted with Rick Prime using advanced technology, including robotic creatures that had Diane's face as war machines. During the fight, Rick Prime activated the Omega Device and demonstrated its power by erasing a character called Slow Mobius from every dimension. He announced his plan to erase the entire Smith family across all dimensions to teach Rick C-137 a lesson. But Evil Morty managed to defeat Rick Prime in combat using his eye patch to predict Rick Prime's moves. Evil Morty captured Rick Prime, disabled all his defenses and backup systems, and strapped him to a chair. Then Evil Morty simply left, giving Rick C-137 the opportunity to kill his nemesis himself. Evil Morty also stole the plans for the Omega Device before departing. Rick C-137 entered the room where Rick Prime sat restrained and helpless. Rick Prime mocked him even while tied up, laughing at Rick for becoming just like him through his decades of violence and murder. Rick did not respond with words. He started punching Rick Prime in the face. Rick kept punching and punching without stopping. Rick Prime continued mocking and laughing even as Rick beat him bloody. The scene showed no comedy or quick dialogue. It was just Rick C-137 punching Rick Prime over and over in brutal close combat. Rick Prime eventually ripped off Rick C-137's leg and started beating him with it. Rick C-137 ripped off Rick Prime's arm and beat him with that instead. They even switched and attached the stolen limbs to their own bodies. The violence continued until Rick C-137 finally beat Rick Prime to death with his bare hands. Rick emerged from the room covered in blood. Morty hugged him in relief, but Rick felt nothing. His face showed only emptiness. The episode ended with Rick back at home going through the motions of normal family life. He looked completely hollow and purposeless. A post-credits scene showed a potential alternate timeline where Rick had given up his revenge quest years earlier. In that timeline, he lived peacefully with alternate versions of Morty and Summer, seeming genuinely happy and fulfilled. The contrast showed what Rick C-137 had lost by dedicating his entire life to revenge. He killed the man who murdered his family, but it brought him no satisfaction. Diane and Beth were still dead. The decades he spent hunting Rick Prime were decades he could have spent building a new life. Evil Morty had warned Morty that Rick would probably feel suicidal after achieving his revenge. Evil Morty was right. Rick had defined himself by his hunt for Rick Prime for so long that killing him left Rick without any purpose or direction. Rick C-137 stands as the most tragic Rick in the multiverse. He was the only Rick who truly loved his family enough to refuse portal travel when first offered. That love got his family killed. He spent decades becoming exactly what Rick Prime accused him of being, a violent killer who murdered countless innocent versions of himself. He founded the Citadel, an institution he despised, as part of a war he started. He took over another Rick's family and pretended to be their grandfather while waiting for a chance at revenge. When he finally got that revenge, it meant nothing. Rick C. 137 destroyed his own life, chasing vengeance that could never bring back what he lost. His story forms the core tragedy running beneath all the comedy and adventure in the series. Every absurd situation and nihilistic joke connects back to this one Rick, who loved his family and lost everything because of it. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Moving on, we have Rick Prime, the original killer of Diane and Beth and the series' true antagonist. Rick Prime stands as the most dangerous Rick in the entire multiverse. He invented portal technology before any other Rick and used it to reshape reality itself. Unlike Rick C. 137, who viewers follow throughout the series, Rick Prime never cared about family or consequences. He abandoned his own daughter Beth, killed countless versions of Diane across infinite dimensions, and spent decades operating outside any system of control. Rick Prime created the foundation for everything that happens in Rick and Morty. His actions set Rick C. 137 on a path of destruction that lasted for decades. He remains the only Rick who truly lived without attachment to anyone or anything. Rick Prime started out like most other Ricks across the multiverse. He grew up in what became known as the Prime Dimension. As an adult, he married a woman named Diane, and they had a daughter together named Beth. Rick Prime became a scientist who worked on various inventions, including teleportation technology. But unlike Rick C. 137, Rick Prime never valued his family. He grew neglectful and uncaring toward Diane and Beth. According to his daughter Beth, Rick Prime had a horrible relationship with his wife. The marriage was failing. Rick Prime chose science over his family every single time. He saw attachment to other people as a weakness that held him back from achieving his full potential. Rick Prime eventually succeeded in inventing intradimensional teleportation. This technology allowed him to travel instantly to any location within his own universe. But when he tested it, Rick Prime discovered something frustrating. He was the last person in his entire universe to invent teleportation. Everyone else already had it. The technology he thought would make him special turned out to be common across the galaxy. Most of the universe already possessed the ability to teleport within their own dimension. This realization pushed Rick Prime to go further. If regular teleportation was not unique enough, he would invent something that nobody else had figured out. Rick Prime became the first Rick in the entire multiverse to invent interdimensional portal travel. He created the portal gun, a device that could open doorways to completely different realities and dimensions. This invention separated Rick Prime from every other being in existence. With portal technology, Rick Prime could travel anywhere across infinite realities. He could visit dimensions with different laws of physics, different histories, different versions of every person who ever existed. The portal gun gave Rick Prime godlike power to explore infinity itself. Only one other Rick would ever independently invent this technology, and that Rick would be Rick C. 137 after Rick Prime destroyed his life. After inventing portal travel, Rick Prime made a decision that defined who he was. He abandoned his family completely. He left Diane and Beth behind in the Prime Dimension without explanation or concern. Rick Prime simply walked away from his wife and daughter to explore the multiverse alone. He saw them as anchors holding him back from experiencing everything portal travel offered. Beth grew up without her father. She eventually married a man named Jerry Smith, and they had 2 children together named Summer and Morty. Rick Prime never returned to check on them or show any interest in the family he left behind. He moved through dimensions without looking back. Rick Prime began visiting other versions of himself across the multiverse. He traveled from dimension to dimension, finding alternate Ricks and offering them portal technology. Rick Prime shared his invention with other Ricks, giving them portal guns and teaching them how interdimensional travel worked. He built a following of Ricks who all possessed the same technology. Rick Prime seemed to want other versions of himself to experience the same freedom he discovered. He believed all Ricks should abandon their families and explore infinity together. Most Ricks accepted the offer eagerly. They took the portal guns and joined Rick Prime in traveling the multiverse. One day, Rick Prime arrived in Dimension C-137. He found a Rick who was still struggling to perfect basic teleportation technology. This Rick lived with his wife Diane and their young daughter Beth. Rick Prime entered the garage while Rick C-137 worked on his inventions. Rick Prime offered him the same deal he offered every other Rick. He explained portal travel and invited Rick C-137 to abandon his family and explore the multiverse. Rick Prime described a life where Rick could do anything he wanted, then hop to a timeline where he never did it. He talked about traveling anywhere and anytime with nobody able to stop him. Rick Prime told Rick C-137 he would become the smartest thing in every conceivable universe, transforming from the smartest man on Earth into an infinite Rick who was essentially a god. Rick C-137 refused the offer. He looked at Rick Prime and simply said he would pass. Rick C-137 explained that he was a different kind of Rick, one who valued his family more than scientific advancement. This rejection enraged Rick Prime. He could not understand how any version of himself would choose family over the unlimited power of portal travel. Rick Prime asked who Rick C-137 thought he was to turn down such an opportunity. Rick C-137's choice challenged everything Rick Prime believed about what it meant to be Rick Sanchez. If one Rick could be happy with his family, it suggested that Rick Prime had made the wrong choice by abandoning his own family. Rick Prime took this rejection as a personal insult. Rick Prime left Dimension C-137, but he did not forget the insult. He sent a bomb through a portal into Rick C-137's garage. The bomb exploded while Diane and young Beth were nearby. They were both killed instantly. Rick C-137 survived, but his entire family was murdered. Rick Prime killed them out of spite and cruelty. He wanted to punish Rick C-137 for choosing family over science. Rick Prime believed that if he destroyed Rick C-137's family, it would force that Rick to become just as terrible and nihilistic as himself. Rick Prime wanted to prove that even a Rick who claimed to care about family would become a killer when that family was taken away. His prediction turned out to be correct. The bomb that killed Diane and Beth transformed Rick C-137 into exactly what Rick Prime expected, a broken alcoholic who spent decades killing other Ricks. After murdering Rick C-137's family, Rick Prime continued traveling the multiverse. He visited more Ricks and repeated his offer of portal technology. Some Ricks refused, just like Rick C-137 had refused. When these Ricks turned down the portal gun, Rick Prime killed their versions of Diane as punishment. He bombed their dimensions and murdered their wives the same way he killed Diane C-137. More and more Ricks lost their families because they chose to stay with them instead of exploring the multiverse. These Ricks began hunting for the Rick who killed their wives. They wanted revenge against the one who destroyed their lives. Rick Prime realized he had created a problem. Multiple Ricks across different dimensions were now searching for him, determined to kill him for murdering their families. Rick Prime decided to solve this problem permanently. He invented a weapon that would eliminate the threat completely. Rick Prime created something called the Omega device. This weapon had the power to erase any individual from every dimension across infinity. When the Omega device killed someone, it did not just kill one version of that person, it erased every version of them, from every reality that ever existed or would exist. The person disappeared from the past, present, and future simultaneously. The weapon even interfered with other people's memories of the erased individual, though not completely. Rick Prime used the Omega device on Diane. He killed one version of her with the weapon, and this single action erased every Diane from every dimension across the entire multiverse. Every Rick who cared about his wife suddenly found Diane deleted from existence. There was no alternate Diane to find in another dimension. There was no backup version living somewhere else. Rick Prime had eliminated her completely from infinity itself. He did this partly to hurt the Ricks who were hunting him, removing any chance they had of finding another Diane to love. But evidence suggests Rick Prime also did it to purge himself of his own attachment to her. By erasing Diane from existence, Rick Prime removed the one person who might have made him question his choices. The first version of the Omega device only worked once. After Rick Prime used it on Diane, the weapon could not be used again, but Rick Prime rebuilt it. He created a second version of the Omega device without this limitation. This new version could be used multiple times to erase as many people as Rick Prime wanted. He kept this weapon hidden in one of his bases, saving it for future use. Rick Prime also created multiple decoys of himself scattered across the multiverse. These decoys fooled Ricks who tried to hunt him down. The decoys led pursuers into traps designed to kill them. Rick Prime built elaborate prisons full of deadly mechanisms to eliminate anyone who came looking for revenge. Rick Prime existed simultaneously in hundreds of locations across the multiverse. He developed technology that allowed him to be in multiple dimensions at the same time. This made him nearly impossible to track or kill. When Rick C-137 finally located him in Season 6, the computer showed Rick Prime existing everywhere at once. There was no single location where Rick Prime could be found because he occupied countless places simultaneously. This ability made Rick Prime more dangerous than any other Rick in existence. He operated outside the normal rules that governed even interdimensional beings. Rick Prime never joined the Citadel of Ricks. When Rick C-137 killed countless Ricks during his revenge quest, and those Ricks eventually banded together to form the Citadel, Rick Prime stayed completely separate from it. Evidence suggests Rick Prime may have formed his own organization before the Citadel existed. Flashbacks show groups of sci-fi-looking Ricks, similar to Rick Prime, suggesting he led a faction of Ricks who followed his philosophy. Some of these Ricks wore symbols resembling the Citadel symbol but without the Citadel structure itself, featuring 3 stars and a writhing ray instead. Rick C-137 killed many of these Ricks during his hunt, destroying this early organization. The surviving Ricks later formed the Council of Ricks and built the Citadel with Rick C-137's help. But Rick Prime never participated in any of this. He remained a lone operator who answered to no one. Rick Prime mocked other Ricks for their attachments. He called Diane their beloved Diane in a sarcastic tone, making fun of Ricks who cared about their wives. When Rick Prime encountered Rick C-137's space cruiser, which used Diane's voice, he laughed at Rick for being so sentimental. Rick Prime saw emotional attachment as pathetic weakness. He represented the pure nihilistic philosophy that many Ricks pretended to believe. While Rick C-137 and other Ricks acted like they did not care about anything, deep down most of them retained some capacity for love and connection. Rick Prime genuinely did not care. He was a true sociopath who felt nothing for other people. Despite his complete nihilism, Rick Prime showed brief moments that suggested he was not entirely heartless. He called Diane our wife when talking to Rick C-137, possibly indicating he retained some degree of attachment to her even after erasing her from existence. When Rick Prime used the Omega device on a character named Slow Mobius, who was apparently Rick's uncle, Rick Prime showed genuine sorrow. He said killing Slow Mobius would hurt, and he looked sad when erasing him. Rick Prime also seemed outraged when he learned Rick C-137 had lived in his house with his daughter Beth and grandson Morty. This anger suggested Rick Prime retained some possessive feelings about his original family, even though he abandoned them decades ago. He also attempted to make small talk with who he thought was his original Morty before trying to kill him. These hints of emotion made Rick Prime more complex than a simple monster, though they did not excuse any of his actions. In Season 7, Episode 5, titled Unmortrican, everything came together. Rick C-137 was fracking the central finite curve searching for Rick Prime. These searches caused disturbances that reached Evil Morty's home at the edge of the curve. Evil Morty got frustrated and decided to help Rick and Morty find Rick Prime just so they would leave him alone. Evil Morty used his advanced technology and intelligence to track Rick Prime's actual location. They found him, and a massive battle began. Rick Prime deployed various weapons, including robotic creatures that had Diane's face attached to them. These Diane bots screamed insults at Rick C-137 while trying to kill him, showing how cruel Rick Prime's psychological warfare could be. During the fight, Rick Prime revealed he had rebuilt the Omega device. He demonstrated its power by using it on Slow Mobius. Slow Mobius appeared through the device, and Rick Prime killed him, erasing every version of Slow Mobius from every dimension. Slow Mobius used his power to slow down time, making his own death last longer in a tragic moment. Rick Prime announced his plan to use the Omega device on every member of the Smith family across all dimensions to teach Rick C-137 a lesson. He wanted to erase Summer, Beth, Jerry, and Morty from existence the same way he erased Diane. But evil Morty stopped him before he could complete this plan. The battle between Rick Prime and Rick C-137 was brutal and intense. Both Ricks fought with advanced cybernetics and weapons. At one point, Rick Prime ripped off Rick C-137's leg and started beating him with it. Rick C-137 responded by ripping off Rick Prime's arm and hitting him with that instead. They even swapped and attached the stolen limbs to their own bodies during the fight. The combat showed how evenly matched they were in terms of fighting ability and technology. Rick Prime nearly killed Rick C-137 multiple times during the confrontation. Evil Morty turned the tide of battle. He used his eye patch to scan Rick Prime's brain and predict his next moves. This gave Evil Morty an advantage that Rick C-137 lacked. Evil Morty managed to defeat Rick Prime in combat and capture him. Evil Morty destroyed all of Rick Prime's backup systems and contingency plans, ensuring there was no way for Rick Prime to resurrect or escape. Then, Evil Morty scanned the schematics for the Omega device and saved the plans for himself. After securing this information, Evil Morty strapped Rick Prime to a chair and disabled all his defenses. Evil Morty left Rick C-137 alone with his helpless enemy as a gift. Evil Morty had no interest in revenge or justice. He just wanted Rick C-137 to finally get closure so everyone would stop causing problems in the multiverse. Rick C-137 entered the room where Rick Prime sat tied to a chair. Rick Prime was completely helpless, but he never stopped talking. He mocked Rick C-137 even while restrained. Rick Prime laughed and made jokes about how Rick C-137 had become exactly like him through decades of violence and murder. He told Rick C-137 that killing him would not bring Diane back or fix anything. Rick Prime remained defiant until his final breath, taunting his killer the entire time. Rick C-137 said nothing in response. He just started punching Rick Prime in the face. Rick kept punching over and over in brutal close combat. The scene was completely silent, except for the sounds of fists hitting flesh. There was no comedy, no clever dialogue, no quick cuts, just Rick C-137 beating Rick Prime to death with his bare hands. Rick Prime died laughing and mocking Rick C-137. He never showed fear or regret. He never apologized or admitted he was wrong. Rick Prime remained true to his nihilistic philosophy until the very end. He genuinely believed nothing mattered, and he refused to pretend otherwise, even when facing death. Rick Prime's final moments proved he was exactly what he always claimed to be, a version of Rick with no attachments and no capacity for genuine emotion. Rick C-137 emerged from the room covered in Rick Prime's blood. When Morty asked if he was okay, Rick said yes, but Rick's face showed nothing but emptiness. Killing Rick Prime brought him no satisfaction or closure. The decades he spent hunting this man were wasted. Diane was still erased from existence, and nothing Rick C-137 did could bring her back. Rick Prime's legacy extended beyond his death. Evil Morty walked away with the plans for the Omega device. This meant someone now possessed the ability to recreate the weapon that could erase anyone from all of existence. Evil Morty told Rick and Morty he would not use the device because doing so would make him a target across the multiverse. But he kept the plans as insurance, as a threat to keep Rick C-137 away from him. If Rick ever bothered Evil Morty again, Evil Morty could use the Omega device to erase Rick or his entire family from infinity. This hanging threat ensured Rick Prime's most dangerous creation would continue affecting the multiverse even after his death. Rick Prime shaped the entire series more than any other character. He invented portal travel and spread it across the multiverse, creating the foundation for everything that happens in the show. He killed Diane and Beth C-137, setting Rick on his path of revenge. Rick Prime's actions led directly to the formation of the Citadel of Ricks, since Rick C-137's killing spree forced other Ricks to band together. Rick C-137 only moved in with the Smith family because he was waiting in Rick Prime's dimension for his enemy to return home. The central relationship between Rick and Morty exists because Rick Prime abandoned his family and Rick C-137 took his place. Every adventure, every character development, every major plot point traces back to decisions Rick Prime made. Rick Prime represented what Rick could have been without any restraint. Rick C-137 pretended to be heartless and nihilistic, but deep down he still cared about people. Rick Prime genuinely did not care about anyone or anything. He lived completely free of attachment or consequence. Rick Prime achieved the ultimate freedom that Rick C-137 claimed to want but could never fully embrace. In doing so, Rick Prime became the most dangerous being in the multiverse. He caused more lasting damage than any other character by erasing Diane from all of existence. He set events in motion that resulted in countless deaths across infinite dimensions. Rick Prime lived exactly how he wanted, without compromise or regret. He died the same way, defiant and mocking until his last moment. Rick Prime was the truest version of what it meant to be Rick Sanchez, stripped of all humanity and compassion. He was the Rick that all other Ricks feared they might become. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Moving on to the Citadel Council, Ricks who governed the multiverse of Ricks. The Council of Ricks governed the entire Citadel for years before Rick C-137 destroyed them. These 6 Ricks formed the public face of Citadel leadership, making decisions that affected millions of Ricks and Mortys across infinite dimensions. They presented themselves as protectors who united to defend against common enemies. In reality, they operated as tyrants who treated Mortys as disposable products and enforced their will through violence. The Council appeared in 2 major episodes before their complete destruction, and their deaths led directly to the secret Shadow Council, taking visible control before evil Morty eliminated them too. The Trans-Dimensional Council of Ricks consisted of 6 members who stood out from all other Ricks in the Citadel. The spokesman was Rick IV, who came from dimension C7218. Rick IV had distinctive hair styled into 3 mohawk-like spikes pointing outward and a long soul patch beard on his chin. He wore white robes with gold and silver trim, along with a golden badge featuring the Citadel insignia. Rick IV spoke for the Council during official proceedings and delivered their judgments. The other 5 Council members were Rick Prime, Quantum Rick, Maximums Rickimus, Zeta Alpha Rick, and Rictiminus Sanchez-Iminius. This Rick Prime, who served on the Council, was not the same Rick Prime who killed Diane and caused the series. They were different Ricks with the same designation, which created confusion. Maximums. Rickimus had long hair that descended past his ears, giving him a different appearance from typical Ricks. Zeta Alpha Rick and Rictiminus Sanchez-Iminius looked more standard but held positions of power within the Council structure. Quantum Rick remained mysterious, with little known about his specific role or fate. These 6 Ricks ruled the Citadel together, making decisions about laws, punishments, and policies. They controlled SEAL Team Ricks, an elite military force that handled dangerous missions. The Council had offered Rick C-137 a position among them when the Citadel formed, recognizing his role in its creation. Rick C-137 refused completely. He found the entire concept hypocritical since Ricks were forming a government to hide from other governments. His refusal and condemnation of the Citadel marked him as a rogue Rick in the Council's eyes. The Council first appeared prominently in the episode Close Rick Counters of the Rick Kind. A Rick was going around murdering other Ricks and kidnapping their Mortys. 27 Ricks had been killed, including one called the Scientist, formerly known as Rick. The Council accused Rick C-137 of committing these murders. They arrested him and Morty, bringing them to the Citadel for judgment. Rick IV acted as spokesman during the trial. The Council refused to let Rick C-137 plead his case or present evidence of innocence. They immediately sentenced him to the machine of unspeakable doom and torture device that would cause endless suffering. Rick C-137 stole a portal gun before entering the machine and escaped from the Citadel. Several Ricks working for the Council took up positions in Rick C-137's house, waiting in case he returned or tried to contact his family. They mocked Jerry and made themselves comfortable, treating his home like their territory. Rick C-137, meanwhile, tracked down the real killer. He found evil Rick operating from a hidden base where he kept enslaved Mortys. Evil Rick turned out to be a robot controlled by Evil Morty, a super-intelligent Morty who had orchestrated everything. After Evil Rick was defeated and beaten to death by the enslaved Mortys, the Council arrived to investigate. They escorted the Rickless Mortys back to their respective dimensions and took Rick C-137 and Morty back to the Citadel. The Council officially apologized to Rick for accusing him of murder, but their apology revealed how they truly viewed Mortys. They offered Rick a coupon for a free Morty, should anything happen to his current one. Rick accepted the coupon while Morty's back was turned, not wanting Morty to know he was replaceable. This moment showed the Council treated Mortys as products that could be swapped out. The free Morty coupon came from a system where the Citadel cloned Mortys and distributed them to Ricks who needed new ones. The Council had essentially created a Morty market where they manufactured and sold living beings to serve as sidekicks. Rick C-137 opposed this system but took the coupon anyway, showing his own complicated relationship with Morty. The Council appeared again in the Rickshank Rickdemption at the start of Season 3. The Galactic Federation had captured Rick C-137 and imprisoned him. The Council learned about this and immediately sent SEAL Team Ricks to assassinate him. They feared Rick might reveal secrets about interdimensional travel to the Federation under interrogation. The Council prioritized protecting their technology over rescuing one of their own. SEAL Team Ricks arrived at the Federation prison to kill Rick C-137 before he could talk. But Rick had already escaped Federation custody through an elaborate scheme. He used the Federation's mind-reading device to swap bodies with different Ricks and Federation officials, creating chaos. Meanwhile, Morty and Summer used an unregistered portal gun to try rescuing Rick. The Council detected their portal usage and arrested them, taking them to the Citadel. The Council held Morty and Summer captive while they hunted for Rick C-137. Rick had other plans. He teleported the entire Citadel into the middle of the Federation's main prison. The massive structure materialized inside another massive structure, causing both to collapse. The collision killed countless Ricks, Mortys, Federation prisoners, and Federation guards. The Council of Ricks died in this chaos, except for Rick IV. Fires burned throughout both structures as battles erupted between surviving Ricks and surviving Federation forces. Rick C-137 used this disaster as cover to infiltrate the Council chamber. He swapped bodies with Quantum Rick or used Quantum Rick's body as a host. Rick then shot 3 Council members dead, catching them completely by surprise. He electrocuted the 4th member, killing him instantly. Only Rick IV survived the initial assault. Rick hunted through the destroyed Citadel looking for Morty and Summer. When he found them, Rick IV was waiting. Rick IV grabbed Summer and held her hostage, using her as a shield against Rick. He threatened to kill Summer if Rick did not surrender. Rick claimed he did not care about Summer's life, trying to make Rick IV think he would not sacrifice himself for her. Morty intervened by pointing a gun at Rick and threatening to shoot him. Rick said he would not let Summer die. Rick IV laughed, admitting he almost fell for the deception. He joined in mocking Morty for being foolish and emotional. Morty shot Rick in anger, apparently killing his grandfather. Rick IV gloated about Morty killing Rick, praising Morty for finally standing up to his abusive grandfather. But Rick had given Morty a fake gun that only appeared to shoot him. As Rick IV gloated and let his guard down, Rick shot him in the head with a real weapon, killing the last Council member. The entire Council of Ricks was now dead. Rick rescued Morty and Summer and left the destroyed Citadel behind. After the Council's death, the Citadel rebuilt itself. The surviving Ricks and Mortys collected donations from other dimensions to fund reconstruction. They approached Rick C-137 asking for money, which he refused since he had destroyed the place intentionally. The rebuilt Citadel supposedly transitioned to democracy. Elections were held to choose new leadership. Multiple candidates ran for president, presenting different political platforms. But this democracy was a facade. A secret group called the Shadow Council of Ricks had been controlling the Citadel the entire time, even before the original council formed. The public council members were figureheads who took orders from this hidden power structure. The Shadow Council remained secret while appearing to let citizens choose their leaders. The Shadow Council revealed itself in The Ricklantis Mix-Up, an episode focusing entirely on life inside the rebuilt Citadel. Multiple storylines showed different aspects of Citadel society, Factory workers struggled with poor conditions. Police officers dealt with crime in Mortytown, a ghetto where Rickless Mortys lived in poverty. Students attended schools where they learned to serve Ricks without question. At Simple Rick's wafer factory, a Rick named Rick J22 worked an assembly line job. Simple Rick's wafers were cookies that tasted good because the company kept a Rick called Simple Rick trapped in a device that extracted his happy memories. Simple Rick experienced the same pleasant memory of his daughter on an endless loop while machines harvested his neurochemicals to flavor the cookies. Rick J22 got passed over for a promotion despite working hard. He snapped and went on a rampage, destroying his assembly machine and killing his supervisor. Rick J22 took Simple Rick hostage and hid in the facility's flavor core, the room where Simple Rick was imprisoned. SWAT Team Ricks surrounded the building and attempted to negotiate. They tried giving Rick J22 a sabotaged portal device that would trap him, but this led to Simple Rick's death when Rick J22 tested it. The SWAT team prepared to storm the flavor core when Rick D. Sanchez III arrived. Rick D. Sanchez III owned the Simple Rick's wafer factory and all the Simple Rick's businesses. He dressed like Willy Wonka with a purple suit, green undershirt, green tie, purple top hat, and gold cane. Rick D. Sanchez III stopped the SWAT team and praised Rick J22 for his courage. He seemingly freed Rick J22, leading him outside to cheering coworkers and giving him a luxury limousine. Rick J22 thought he had won his freedom through rebellion, but this was just theater. Rick D. Sanchez III tasered Rick J22 as soon as they were in the limo. The narrator revealed that Rick J22's attempted escape would become the new flavor for Simple Rick's wafers. They plugged Rick J22 into the memory extraction device and ran his escape attempt on a loop, harvesting his feelings of rebellion and freedom to sell as cookies. Rick D. Sanchez III replaced one exploited Rick with another without missing a beat. This showed the cruel efficiency of Rick capitalism, where even rebellion became a product. Rick D. Sanchez III was extremely wealthy and powerful as one of the biggest business owners in the Citadel. He also sat on the Shadow Council of Ricks, the secret group that truly controlled everything. Hours after dealing with Rick J22, Rick D. Sanchez III went to a meeting between the Shadow Council and the Citadel's new president. Evil Morty had won the presidential election after running as candidate Morty from the Morty Party. During the campaign, Evil Morty gave an inspiring speech about the division between Ricks and Mortys. He talked about how schools taught Mortys they were all the same to suppress what made them unique. He mentioned how streets were full of violence between Mortys, while real injustice went unpunished. He pointed out how factory Ricks earned a fraction of their bosses' salaries despite having identical intelligence. Evil Morty's speech resonated with the desperate citizens of the Citadel. His campaign manager Morty did not believe he could win, so Evil Morty fired him immediately after the speech for doubting him. Campaign manager Morty later received a file from investigator Rick revealing Evil Morty's true identity. Campaign manager Morty attempted to assassinate Evil Morty during a public appearance but failed. He was arrested and executed by being thrown out an airlock into space. Evil Morty won the election, becoming the first president of the Citadel and the first Morty to hold such power. The Shadow Council assumed this president would be their puppet, like all previous leaders. The Shadow Council met with President Morty in a private room. Rick D. Sanchez III arrived late, just in time to hear Garment District Rick assert the council's dominance. Garment District Rick told President Morty that it did not matter who sat in the president's chair because the Shadow Council would always control the Citadel. He made clear that President Morty would answer to them rather than make his own choices. The Shadow Council had ruled from the shadows for years, manipulating elections and controlling policies while remaining hidden. They consisted of the most powerful Ricks in the entire Citadel, the wealthiest business owners and most influential figures. They predated even the original Council of Ricks. President Morty sat with his back to the Shadow Council while they spoke. He held up a mirror so he could see their reflections. President Morty asked the Shadow Council members to raise their hands if they agreed with Garment District Rick's statement about controlling the Citadel. Rick D. Sanchez III and most of the other council members raised their hands, confirming they expected to control the new president. President Morty snapped his fingers. Guard Ricks positioned around the room immediately opened fire. They shot every Shadow Council member who raised their hand, executing them on President Morty's orders. Rick D. Sanchez III died along with Garment District Rick and the others who thought they would rule through President Morty. Only 2 Shadow Council members survived. They had not raised their hands when asked if they agreed with the statement about controlling the Citadel. These 2 Ricks looked terrified as they watched their colleagues die around them. President Morty asked if the 2 survivors would obey him. They quickly agreed, understanding that President Morty had just seized absolute power by eliminating anyone who would oppose him. The executed council members' bodies were later flushed out into space through airlocks, along with hundreds of other corpses. The space outside the Citadel became choked with dead Ricks and Mortys floating among debris. The 2 surviving Shadow Council members resembled real-world tech billionaires Elon Musk and Steve Jobs, suggesting the wealthiest Ricks had wisely chosen not to challenge President Morty's authority. President Morty then delivered a speech to himself while pouring a drink. He mentioned how this seemed like a good time for a cold, calculated speech with sinister overtones about politics, order, brotherhood, and power. But he said speeches were for campaigning, and now was the time for action. President Morty revealed himself to be Evil Morty, the same Morty who controlled Evil Rick in the first season. Documents found on campaign manager Morty's corpse showed photographs of Evil Morty wearing his signature eye patch. The music playing during this revelation was the same theme that played when Evil Morty was first revealed, confirming his identity. The Council of Ricks and Shadow Council represented the worst aspects of Rick government. They treated Mortys as disposable products to be manufactured and sold. They maintained power through violence and intimidation. They exploited workers like Rick J22 and Simple Rick, turning even their suffering into profit. They rigged elections to maintain the illusion of democracy while secretly controlling everything. They sent assassination teams to kill one of their own founders rather than risk losing their technological monopoly. They took hostages and threatened children to protect themselves. These Ricks created a society based on hierarchy, where they remained at the top and everyone else served their interests. The Council of Ricks claimed they formed to protect Ricks from enemies across the multiverse. They said the Citadel existed as a safe haven where Ricks could live without fear of the Galactic Federation or other threats, but their true goal was maintaining their own power and privilege. They hoarded portal technology and punished Ricks who operated independently. They created systems to control the Morty population through cloning and education that taught Mortys to accept their inferior status. They built an economy where wealthy Ricks like Rick D. Sanchez III exploited workers while living in luxury. The Citadel under Council rule became exactly what Rick C-137 warned it would become, a government that oppressed its own people. Rick C-137's destruction of the Council did not free the Citadel from tyranny. The Shadow Council simply took visible control once the Public Council died. When Evil Morty eliminated the Shadow Council, he did not establish democracy either. He became a dictator who ruled through fear and killed anyone who opposed him. Evil Morty used the systems the councils created for his own purposes, eventually destroying the entire Citadel to escape the central finite curve. The Council of Ricks and Shadow Council showed how Ricks governed when given power. They created hierarchies, exploited the vulnerable, and maintained control through violence. Their deaths changed who ruled the Citadel, but not the fundamental nature of Rick authority, which always placed their own interests above everyone else's well-being. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Moving on to Evil Rick, the controlled cyborg Rick, operated by Evil Morty. Evil Rick stands as one of the most tragic Rick variants in the entire multiverse. Unlike other Ricks who made their own choices, Evil Rick lost his free will completely. He became a puppet, controlled remotely by his own grandson, through advanced cybernetic implants wired into his brain. Evil Rick originated from Dimension 7960V and operated as the tool of Evil Morty's plans for years. Every word Evil Rick spoke, every action he took, came directly from Evil Morty puppeteering him through technology hidden inside a black eye patch. Evil Rick wanted to die, but his implants prevented him from ending his own life. He finally got his wish when imprisoned. Mortys beat him to death, giving him the only escape he could achieve. Evil Rick started out as a normal Rick from Dimension 79-1. He was the grandfather of the Morty, who would become known as Evil Morty. Like most Ricks across the multiverse, this Rick took his grandson on dangerous adventures through space and different dimensions. He treated Morty the same way most Ricks treated their Mortys, as disposable sidekicks who existed to provide cover for Rick's genius brainwaves. The relationship followed the standard pattern of an alcoholic genius grandfather dragging his nervous grandson through traumatic experiences. Morty got humiliated repeatedly while Rick showed no concern for his well-being or feelings. This dynamic continued through many adventures until Morty finally reached his breaking point. One particular adventure pushed evil Morty too far. During this adventure, evil Morty had to go up into someone's rectum, a type of humiliation that Ricks frequently subjected their Mortys to during missions. After this adventure, evil Morty got into an intense argument with his Rick. He threatened to leave Rick and stop going on adventures. Rick challenged evil Morty to follow through on the threat, not believing his grandson would actually abandon him. Most Mortys backed down from such challenges because they lacked the intelligence and willpower to survive without their Ricks. But evil Morty was different from other Mortys. He possessed intelligence that rivaled Rick's own genius, and he had the determination to act on his threats. Evil Morty backed down from the argument and offered Rick a drink instead. This appeared to be evil Morty surrendering and accepting his place. Rick got drunk while evil Morty went to his room. But evil Morty was not surrendering. He went to his room to finish working on a device he had been engineering in secret. Evil Morty had designed advanced mind control technology that could be implanted into Rick's brain. The device would allow evil Morty to control every aspect of Rick's body and mind remotely through a transmitter. Evil Morty built this technology himself, demonstrating scientific knowledge far beyond what any normal Morty possessed. He created cybernetics sophisticated enough to override a Rick's consciousness and turn him into a remote-controlled puppet. When evil Morty finished his device, he returned to the garage where Rick had gotten blackout drunk. Rick was incapacitated from alcohol, unable to defend himself or realize what was happening. Evil Morty scalped his grandfather while Rick was unconscious. He opened Rick's skull and surgically implanted the control devices directly into Rick's brain. The cybernetics wove throughout Rick's neural tissue, sophisticated technology that integrated with his biological systems. Evil Morty attached a receiver chip that would respond to commands from a transmitter. Every thought, every movement, every word would now come from evil Morty rather than Rick himself. The transmitter that controlled everything was hidden inside a black eye patch that evil Morty wore over his left eye. The transformation changed evil Rick's appearance. His original light blue shirt was replaced with a black shirt. Dark circles appeared under his eyes, suggesting sleep deprivation or the physical toll of being controlled. A scar formed on his lips. These physical changes marked him as different from other Ricks, though nobody recognized the true significance. Evil Rick now existed as a cyborg, part biological and part mechanical. His body remained alive, but his mind no longer controlled his actions. Evil Morty puppeteered every aspect of evil Rick's behavior through the eye patch transmitter. When evil Rick spoke, the words came from evil Morty speaking through him. When evil Rick moved, evil Morty controlled those movements remotely. Evil Rick attempted suicide at least once after being converted into a cyborg. The cybernetic implants detected the suicide attempt and prevented him from completing it. The technology not only controlled evil Rick, but monitored his thoughts and actions, alerting evil Morty to any attempt at resistance or self-harm. Evil Morty responded by deactivating evil Rick temporarily as punishment for the suicide attempt. This showed the complete control evil Morty exercised over his grandfather. Evil Rick existed as a prisoner in his own body, aware of what was happening but unable to stop it. He could not speak his own thoughts, move his own body, or end his own suffering. The implants kept him alive and functional, while stripping away all autonomy. After converting his Rick into a puppet, evil Morty traveled to the Citadel of Ricks. He went to the Morty Agency, a facility that tracked all Mortys associated with Ricks in the Citadel. Evil Morty killed the employees working at the Morty Agency and erased his own profile from their database. This removed any official record of evil Morty's existence, making him untraceable. Nobody in the Citadel knew about evil Morty or could connect him to what would happen next. With his identity erased, evil Morty could operate freely without anyone realizing a rogue Morty existed. The Citadel would blame everything on evil Rick alone. Evil Morty built or occupied a base of operations on a planet called Crustula. This base became the center of a massive operation. Evil Rick and Evil Morty began traveling through dimensions, killing Ricks and kidnapping their Mortys. They murdered 27 Ricks from alternate dimensions and took their Mortys as prisoners. Each Rick was killed efficiently, showing the tactical skill Evil Morty possessed even while operating through his puppet. The murders spread across multiple dimensions, creating panic among the Rick community. Nobody could figure out who was killing Ricks or why. The pattern made no sense according to normal Rick behavior. Ricks fought each other sometimes, but not like this. Not with this level of systematic hunting. The base on Crustula became a prison and torture facility for the kidnapped Mortys. Evil Morty imprisoned hundreds of Mortys there, possibly even thousands. The exact number remains unknown, but the scale was massive. These Mortys came from the dimensions where Evil Rick had killed their Ricks. Many of the imprisoned Mortys were hooked up to torture devices that caused them constant pain. Evil Morty designed this torture for a specific purpose. The suffering Mortys produced brainwaves that could hide Rick's genius brainwaves from detection. Ricks normally use their Mortys as cloaking devices because Morty's simple brainwaves canceled out Rick's smart brainwaves, making Rick invisible to scanners that tracked high intelligence. Evil Morty amplified this effect by torturing hundreds of Mortys simultaneously. The walls of the base contained Mortys wired into machines that kept them in agony. Their collective anguish created enough interference to completely hide Evil Rick and Evil Morty from the Citadel's detection systems. The Citadel could not locate them or track their movements because the tortured Mortys generated too much noise. This allowed Evil Rick and Evil Morty to operate for an extended period without being caught. The imprisoned Mortys suffered endlessly to serve as living shields protecting their captor. Evil Morty showed no sympathy for his fellow Mortys, even while claiming to want freedom from Rick's control. Evil Morty had a goal beyond just killing Ricks. He wanted information about the Citadel and the central finite curve. Evil Rick interrogated the captured Ricks before killing them, downloading their knowledge and memories. Evil Morty absorbed information from multiple Ricks, learning about the structure of the Citadel and how it operated. He discovered the existence of the central finite curve, a section of the multiverse that Rick C-137 and other Ricks had created. The central finite curve contained only dimensions where Rick was the smartest being in the universe. Ricks had separated these dimensions from the larger multiverse to ensure they always remained on top. Evil Morty wanted to understand this system so he could eventually escape it. The investigation into the murdered Ricks eventually focused on Rick C-137. Evil Morty had hacked into Rick C-137's portal gun and altered its records. The hack made it appear that Rick C-137 had recently visited the dimensions of all the murdered Ricks. The fabricated evidence convinced the Council of Ricks that Rick C-137 was responsible for the killings. The Council arrested Rick C-137 and brought him to the Citadel for trial. They wrongfully convicted him of murdering 27 Ricks and kidnapping their Mortys. Rick C-137 tried to prove his innocence, but the Council refused to listen. They sentenced him to the machine of unspeakable doom before he escaped. Rick C-137 tracked down the real killer by following clues and using his own genius. He located Evil Rick's base on Crustula. When Rick C-137 and Morty arrived, they found the horrifying facility full of tortured Mortys. The base was a military compound constructed with enormous numbers of constantly suffering Mortys wired into the walls for cloaking. Rick C-137 seemed nonplussed by the torture, which disturbed Morty deeply. Evil Rick and Evil Morty captured them using the lobster-like alien soldiers stationed at the base. Evil Rick took Rick C-137 to have his brain downloaded while Evil Morty separated Morty from Rick. Evil Rick connected Rick C-137 to a device that would copy all his memories and knowledge. This brain scan was Evil Morty's primary goal. He needed Rick C-137's memories, because Rick C-137 had helped design and build the Citadel. The information in Rick C-137's brain contained details about the central finite curve and how to manipulate it. Evil Rick began downloading Rick C-137's memories, but the process took time. Evil Rick engaged in villain dialogue while the download proceeded, slow clapping and claiming he invented slow clapping in his dimension. Rick C-137 mocked the slow clap as played out. Evil Rick took offense, insisting it was original in his dimension. This conversation was actually Evil Morty speaking through Evil Rick's body. While Evil Rick downloaded Rick C-137's memories, Morty led a rebellion among the imprisoned Mortys. Morty C-137 found himself locked in a cell with hundreds of other captured Mortys. These Mortys had suffered torture and imprisonment under Evil Rick for an unknown length of time. They had lost hope and accepted their fate. But Morty C-137 inspired them to fight back. He convinced the imprisoned Mortys that they could overpower Evil Rick if they worked together. The Mortys broke free from their cells and released each other from the torture devices. They swarmed through the base in a massive uprising. The Morty rebellion interrupted Evil Rick's brain download before it completed. Evil Rick only managed to copy a portion of Rick C-137's memories before the Mortys attacked. Morty freed Rick C-137 from the download device. Rick called the Council of Ricks to inform them about the real killer and clear his name. The council arrived at the base to investigate and clean up the situation. Meanwhile, the freed Mortys found Evil Rick. Hundreds of tortured and enraged Mortys surrounded him. They had suffered endlessly because of Evil Rick. Now they had the chance for revenge. The Mortys attacked Evil Rick in a massive swarm. They trampled him and beat him violently. Evil Rick did not fight back or try to defend himself. Instead, he urged the Mortys to kill him. He wanted death desperately, seeing it as the only escape from Evil Morty's control. The Mortys bludgeoned Evil Rick in a frenzy of violence. They kept beating him even after he died, pounding his corpse into a pool of blood. The Mortys had suffered too much to stop quickly. When the Council of Ricks arrived, they calmed the Mortys down and escorted them to safety. The council planned to take all the Rickless Mortys back to the Citadel, where they would be assigned new Ricks. Council Ricks examined Evil Rick's body while investigating the crime scene. They removed the top of Evil Rick's skull to inspect his brain. Inside, they found sophisticated cybernetic technology woven throughout his neural tissue. A receiver chip sat embedded in his brain, connected to circuitry that ran through his entire nervous system. One Rick recognized the technology immediately. Evil Rick had been controlled remotely, puppeteered by somebody else the entire time. The council realized that Evil Rick was a cyborg who had no control over his own actions. Someone else had used Evil Rick as a tool to kill Ricks and kidnap Mortys. The council did not know who controlled Evil Rick or where the controller had gone. The reveal that Evil Rick was a puppet happened while dramatic music played. The song For the Damaged Coda by Blonde Redhead started as the Ricks discovered the truth. The camera showed the receiver in Evil Rick's brain, then cut to Evil Morty standing among the freed Mortys. Evil Morty wore his black eye patch over his left eye. The eye patch looked like a simple fashion choice or injury cover. But inside the eye patch sat the transmitter that had controlled Evil Rick. Evil Morty reached up and removed the eye patch. He looked at it for a moment, then stomped on it with his shoe. The transmitter crushed under his foot, destroying the evidence of his control over Evil Rick. Evil Morty blended into the crowd of rescued Mortys. He looked just like any other traumatized Morty who had been imprisoned by Evil Rick. The Council Ricks, loading Mortys onto transport ships back to the Citadel, had no way to identify Evil Morty as different from the others. Evil Morty boarded a refugee ship with the other Mortys, escaping to the Citadel undetected. The Council never learned that a Morty had controlled Evil Rick. They searched for the mysterious controller but found no leads. Evil Morty successfully framed his own puppet for crimes he committed, then walked away completely free while taking refuge in the society he had just attacked. Evil Rick appeared briefly in later episodes as a reference. A photograph of Evil Rick under Evil Morty's control was shown in the Ricklantis mix-up. When Evil Morty revealed himself as president of the Citadel in that episode, the same song for the damaged coda played, confirming his identity. The music became Evil Morty's theme, linking him back to the moment when his control of Evil Rick was revealed to viewers. In Rick Mirai Jack, Evil Morty mentioned Evil Rick while explaining how he had obtained access to Rick C-137's memories. The partial brain scan Evil Rick completed provided Evil Morty with crucial information he needed years later. In Unmortricken, Rick C-137 referred to him as Evil Rick when reuniting with Evil Morty, who scoffed at the name. Evil Rick exists as a unique class of weaponized Rick. Most Rick variants made their own choices even when those choices were terrible. Evil Rick had no choices at all. He was converted into a tool against his will, forced to commit atrocities while fully aware of what he was doing but unable to stop. The cybernetic technology that controlled him represented a terrifying achievement. Evil Morty created systems sophisticated enough to override a Rick's consciousness completely. This technology gave a Morty absolute power over a Rick for the first time in the series. Evil Rick suffered as much as any Rick in the multiverse, trapped in a prison made from his own body. The implants prevented Evil Rick from committing suicide even when he desperately wanted to die. They monitored his thoughts and detected any attempt at self-harm. Evil Morty designed the control systems to keep Evil Rick alive and functional regardless of Evil Rick's wishes. This turned Evil Rick into a slave with no possibility of escape except through someone else killing him. The Mortys who beat him to death actually granted Evil Rick's deepest wish. He welcomed death when it finally came, urging the Mortys to finish the job. Those final moments when the Mortys swarmed him represented the only time Evil Rick expressed his own desires while under Evil Morty's control. Evil Rick's story reveals the dark potential of Morty intelligence combined with Rick technology. Evil Morty demonstrated that a sufficiently smart Morty could not only match Rick, but completely dominate him. Most Ricks assumed Mortys were too stupid and weak-willed to pose any threat. They treated Mortys as disposable tools without considering that some Mortys might develop intelligence and ruthlessness surpassing their own. Evil Rick proved that Ricks were vulnerable to their own technology being used against them. The cybernetics Evil Morty created could theoretically be used on any Rick, turning the smartest beings in the universe into puppets for someone else's plans. Evil Rick operated for years under Evil Morty's control before being caught. During that time, he killed 27 Ricks and kidnapped hundreds or thousands of Mortys. He built a massive torture facility and ran operations across multiple dimensions. All of this happened while the real Evil Rick remained a prisoner in his own skull, watching helplessly as his body committed terrible crimes. The Council of Ricks never learned the full truth about Evil Rick. They discovered he was controlled remotely, but never identified Evil Morty as the controller. Evil Rick died as a mystery, a cyborg puppet whose master escaped to continue plotting against the Citadel for years to come. Evil Rick stands as one of the most tragic Rick variants, precisely because he lost the one thing that defined Ricks across the multiverse: his free will and autonomy. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Moving on to Doofus Rick, the friendly outlier from Dimension J, 19 Zeta 7. Doofus Rick, the friendly outlier from Dimension J, 19 Zeta 7. Rick Sanchez from Dimension J, 19 Zeta 7 stands out from every other version of Rick across the multiverse. While most Ricks share the same cruel attitude, genius intellect, and complete disregard for other people, this particular Rick breaks the pattern completely. The other Ricks gave him a nickname that sticks despite his protests. They call him Doofus Rick. He hates the name and corrects people whenever they use it, but nobody listens. To the other Ricks, he represents everything a Rick should never be. His appearance immediately sets him apart from other versions of Rick Sanchez. He has the same light blue hair and pale grayish skin that all Ricks share, along with the standard white lab coat over a blue sweater and brown pants. But his hairstyle looks nothing like the spiky, chaotic mess that sits on top of most Ricks. Instead, he has a bowl cut that looks neat and carefully maintained. His eyes move in different directions from each other, giving him a dopey appearance that other Ricks find hilarious. Large buck teeth protrude from his mouth, and he has a thick unibrow that stretches across his forehead. Everything about his physical appearance screams different, and in the world of Ricks, different means weak. The cruelest rumor that follows Doofus Rick comes from the other Ricks who visit the Citadel. They spread stories that everyone in his dimension eats their own feces. They tell this story to anyone who will listen, especially when Doofus Rick stands within earshot. The rumor gets repeated so often that it becomes accepted as fact among the Rick community. When Jerry Smith meets Doofus Rick for the first time at the Smith household during an investigation by the Council of Ricks, two other Ricks immediately approach to inform Jerry about this supposed fact. They ask Jerry if he knows that Doofus Rick eats poop. Doofus Rick protests loudly, insisting that he does not eat poop and that the other Ricks always act mean toward him. His protests fall on deaf ears. The rumor persists and becomes his defining characteristic among the other Ricks. However, the show's co-creator Justin Roiland later confirmed on the DVD commentary track that Doofus Rick does not actually eat feces. The rumor exists purely as a tool for the other Ricks to bully and belittle him. His personal life differs dramatically from other Ricks in one crucial way. He never married and never had any children. This fact alone makes him unique in the multiverse of Ricks, where nearly every version has some connection to a Beth and a family. Without a Morty of his own bloodline, the Citadel assigned him a Morty from another dimension. This assigned Morty comes from a reality where every person looks like actor Eric Stoltz from the movie Mask, the film that starred Cher. Jerry notices this immediately upon seeing Doofus Rick's Morty, commenting on the resemblance. Doofus Rick explains the situation with genuine warmth, telling Jerry that this Morty got assigned to him specifically because he never had kids of his own. He adds that, if he had children, he would love them if they turned out as smart and successful as Jerry. This comment about Jerry reveals the most shocking aspect of Doofus Rick's personality. He genuinely respects Jerry Smith. In the entire multiverse, across infinite dimensions and countless versions of reality, Doofus Rick appears to be the only Rick who treats Jerry with kindness and admiration. When Doofus Rick enters the Smith household during the investigation, Jerry sits at his laptop trying to work. Jerry initially tells Doofus Rick to leave him alone because he is working. Doofus Rick asks what kind of work Jerry does, and Jerry admits he currently finds himself between advertising jobs. Most people would recognize this statement as a polite way of saying Jerry is unemployed, but Doofus Rick responds with genuine fascination. He asks if advertising means people need help figuring out what to buy, and Jerry helps them. Jerry confirms this simplified explanation, noting that the actual work involves more complexity. Doofus Rick then tells Jerry that he seems like a guy who really has everything together. Jerry immediately becomes suspicious. He looks around for hidden Ricks, convinced that Doofus Rick must be making fun of him. Jerry directly asks if Doofus Rick is being a jerk right now. The question catches Doofus Rick completely off guard. He expresses horror at the idea that he might be offending Jerry. He insists that he would never want to cause any offense. This genuine kindness shocks Jerry, because he spends most of his life getting mocked by his own Rick. The sincerity in Doofus Rick's voice makes it clear that he truly admires Jerry. This emotional intelligence and empathy towards someone that all other Ricks consider worthless proves that Doofus Rick thinks differently than every other Rick variant. Later in the episode, Jerry and Doofus Rick work together in Rick's garage. Doofus Rick stands at the workbench, mixing chemicals together while Jerry watches with interest. Doofus Rick explains that if they add a little more titanium nitrate and just a small amount of chlorified tartrate, they will create ovenless brownies. The chemicals mix together and produce edible brownies without requiring any heat or cooking time. Jerry marvels at the invention, commenting that it shows what an incredible mind can accomplish when priorities are in order. Doofus Rick refuses to take full credit for the invention. He tells Jerry that he cannot claim all the credit because the whole thing was Jerry's idea to begin with. This humility stands in stark contrast to the massive ego that defines most Ricks. The two men leave the garage, and Jerry tells Doofus Rick that he wants to show him something. Jerry pulls out a box and opens it to reveal a coin collection. These coins feature small R2-D2 droids from Star Wars, in the place where George Washington's face normally appears. Jerry explains that everybody makes fun of him for buying these coins, but he wants to know what a genius scientist thinks about them. He points out the R2-D2 figures where the founding fathers should be. Doofus Rick picks up the coins and examines them carefully. He tells Jerry honestly that he cannot promise these coins will increase in value or even hold their current value. This brutal honesty about the coins having no real investment potential could crush Jerry's spirits. But Doofus Rick delivers the message with such kindness and respect that the truth lands softly. The scene shows that Doofus Rick values honesty while still caring about other people's feelings. The friendship between Jerry and Doofus Rick grows throughout the day. At one point, Doofus Rick becomes emotional when other Ricks continue their relentless bullying. He breaks down crying, and Jerry comforts him. The two men bond over being outcasts. Every other Rick treats Doofus Rick like garbage because he acts kind instead of cruel. Meanwhile, Jerry gets treated like garbage by his own Rick for being normal instead of a genius. They find common ground in their shared experience of constant mockery. Jerry tells Doofus Rick something that strikes at the heart of the Rick philosophy. He explains that if someone wants to get anywhere in life, they need to stop listening to themselves. This advice specifically targets the way other Ricks judge Doofus Rick. Those Ricks claim he is the worst one, but they make that judgment based on values that prioritize cruelty and superiority. Jerry argues that by their terrible standards, being called the worst actually makes Doofus Rick the best. Doofus Rick absorbs this wisdom and expresses genuine admiration for Jerry's insight. He tells Jerry that this wisdom must be why Jerry works in advertising. The compliment demonstrates how Doofus Rick builds people up instead of tearing them down. Jerry responds by telling Doofus Rick that the fact he feels this way makes him the best Rick of them all. The episode later shows that Jerry prefers Doofus Rick over his own Rick. When given the choice, Jerry hugs Doofus Rick and declares that he found his Rick. This moment reveals how much Jerry craves basic respect and kindness, things his own Rick never provides. Despite being mocked as the dumbest Rick, Doofus Rick displays remarkable scientific ability. The ovenless brownies he creates require advanced knowledge of chemistry and molecular structure. The invention shows that he can manipulate matter at a chemical level to produce desired results. This technological feat proves that his scientific mind functions at an extremely high level. The other Ricks dismiss him as unintelligent, but evidence suggests they judge intelligence differently than most people would. They value cold logic, cruelty, and selfishness. Doofus Rick possesses emotional intelligence that allows him to connect with people and understand their feelings. He can read social situations and respond with appropriate empathy. This type of intelligence matters just as much as scientific knowledge, but the other Ricks refuse to acknowledge it. The episode ends with a scene that cements the unusual friendship. After all, the other Ricks leave the Smith household, and the investigation concludes. Jerry finds himself alone in his room. He stares out the window on a rainy evening, clearly missing his new friend. Then he sees Doofus Rick standing across the street in the rain. The two men spot each other, and Jerry's face lights up with genuine joy. He waves at Doofus Rick enthusiastically. Doofus Rick waves back with equal warmth. The main Rick walks into the room at that exact moment and sees Jerry waving. He immediately understands what happened. Rick finds the whole situation hilarious. He laughs at Jerry for being friends with Doofus Rick and immediately decides to call other Ricks to tell them about this perfect joke. The scene shows how the cruel Ricks view kindness and friendship as weakness worthy of mockery. Doofus Rick's role in the larger Rick and Morty universe raises interesting questions about what makes someone valuable. The show presents a multiverse where infinite versions of Rick exist, and nearly all of them embrace cruelty, violence, and selfishness as core personality traits. They view empathy as weakness and kindness as stupidity. The Council of Ricks creates an entire civilization based on these values, building the Citadel where Ricks gather to celebrate their own superiority. They established a militia to enforce their rules across dimensions. Doofus Rick serves in this militia despite his gentle nature, though he wears a regular lab coat instead of the official militia uniform. This small act of nonconformity suggests he participates in the system while quietly rejecting its values. The central finite curve, revealed in later seasons, walls off realities where Rick is not the smartest person in his dimension. This barrier theoretically means that Doofus Rick must still be the most intelligent person in Dimension J19 Zeta 7, even if he ranks as the least intelligent Rick. The other Ricks built their entire society around the idea that Rick must always be the smartest person in any reality. Yet they simultaneously mock Doofus Rick for being too dumb. This contradiction exposes the shallow and hypocritical nature of their superiority complex. The character of Doofus Rick serves as a mirror that reflects the fundamental emptiness of standard Rick behavior. Every other Rick chooses to be alone, pushing away family and friends with constant abuse and neglect. They tell themselves this makes them strong and independent. Doofus Rick chooses connection, kindness, and genuine relationships. The other Ricks look at him and see weakness. Jerry looks at him and sees the only Rick worth knowing. The episode asks viewers to consider which Rick truly has life figured out. Is it the Ricks who have infinite knowledge but no meaningful relationships? Or is it the Rick who has both scientific ability and the capacity to make another person feel valued? Doofus Rick never appears again in the main series after this episode, though his picture shows up in Rick's garage in a later season. His absence from subsequent episodes makes his impact more powerful. In one brief appearance, he demonstrates that kindness and scientific genius can coexist. He proves that intelligence comes in many forms beyond cold logic. Most importantly, he shows Jerry that somewhere in the infinite multiverse, someone sees his worth. That gift of validation and respect means more to Jerry than any scientific invention or adventure ever could. Doofus Rick breaks the Rick archetype completely, and in doing so, he becomes the most memorable Rick variant to many fans of the show. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Next up, Simple Rick, the exploited factory worker, trapped inside Simple Rick's Wafer Co. Simple Rick, the exploited factory worker held at Simple Rick's Wafer Co. Rick Sanchez exists in a version of reality located 60 iterations off the central finite curve. This measurement describes how far his dimension sits from the main cluster of Rick realities that most stories focus on. In his dimension, this particular Rick made choices that took him down a completely different path than almost every other version of himself across the multiverse. Instead of building portal guns and exploring infinite dimensions, he chose to work with his hands. He became a carpenter. He preferred working with wood over polarity plating, the technical materials that other Ricks use to build their advanced technology. His life remained simple, focused on creating physical objects rather than scientific breakthroughs. Because of this choice, other Ricks gave him a name that stuck. They call him Simple Rick. Simple Rick wears a light blue collared shirt and dark blue pants. His clothing looks normal compared to the white lab coats that almost every other Rick wears constantly. The outfit makes him appear like a regular working man instead of a genius scientist. His appearance matches a version of Rick from before science and technology consumed his entire life. He looks like a Rick who never gave up on the simple pleasures of family and manual labor. His whole existence represents a road not taken by the vast majority of Rick variants across reality. The most important moment in Simple Rick's life happened on his daughter Beth's birthday. The memory shows a young Beth, possibly around 3 years old, based on the number of candles sitting on her birthday cake. Simple Rick stands in what appears to be a garage or workshop, surrounded by wood and tools. He holds up a present that he built himself using his woodworking skills. The gift appears to be a handmade wooden toy, crafted with care and attention. Beth's face lights up with pure joy when she sees what her father made for her. She jumps up and down with excitement, her whole body expressing the happiness she feels in that moment. She yells out 3 words that capture the entire meaning of the scene. She shouts with complete sincerity and love that she loves her daddy. This single moment represents the peak of Simple Rick's happiness. He realized something that most other Ricks never understand or accept. He figured out that the greatest thing he would ever create in his entire life was not a scientific invention or a technological marvel. His greatest creation was his daughter. That memory should have remained a private moment shared between a father and daughter. It should have stayed locked in Simple Rick's mind as a cherished personal experience. But the Citadel of Ricks operates differently than normal society. The Citadel represents a massive city where thousands of Rick and Morty variants live together after being pulled from their original dimensions. The society functions on capitalism and exploitation, with powerful Ricks controlling massive companies and poor Ricks working in terrible conditions for minimal pay. One of these companies belongs to Rick D. Sanchez III, a wealthy Rick who wears a purple suit with a green undershirt and green tie, along with a purple top hat and a gold cane. His appearance deliberately mirrors Willy Wonka, the famous chocolate factory owner. Rick D. Sanchez III owns Simple Rick's Wafer Cookie Factory, a food manufacturing company that produces wafer cookies sold throughout the Citadel. The secret ingredient that makes Simple Rick's wafers taste special comes from an unethical source that the company advertises openly. The factory kidnapped Simple Rick from his dimension at some point before the events shown in the episode. They brought him to the Citadel against his will and imprisoned him inside a room at the factory. The room contains a chair where Simple Rick sits strapped down with restraints that prevent him from moving or escaping. A strange helmet sits on his head, connected to various machines through tubes and wires. The helmet forces Simple Rick to experience that same birthday memory on an endless loop. He relives the moment of giving Beth her present, and hearing her say she loves him over and over again without stopping. Every time the memory plays, his brain produces chemicals associated with happiness, joy, and contentment. The machines attached to the helmet extract these brain chemicals as they get secreted. The chemical mixture gets liquefied and becomes the primary flavoring ingredient for every Simple Rick's wafer cookie that the factory produces. The commercial that advertises these cookies plays on Citadel Morning News during a regular programming break. A narrator with a warm, country-sounding voice describes the process, while guitar music plays in the background. The narrator explains that 60 iterations off the central finite curve, there lives a Rick who works more with wood than polarity plating. He tells the audience that this Rick's name is Simple Rick, but he is no dummy. The narrator states that Simple Rick realized long ago that the greatest thing he would ever create was his daughter. The commercial then shows footage of young Beth jumping excitedly while Simple Rick watches her with obvious love. The narrator continues explaining that they captured that moment. The camera pulls back to reveal Simple Rick unconscious in the chair with the helmet on his head while machines hum around him. The narrator calmly explains that they run the memory on a loop through Simple Rick's mind, and the chemical his brain secretes goes into every Simple Rick's Simple Wafers wafer cookie. The commercial ends with the tagline asking viewers to come home to the impossible flavor of their own completion and to come home to Simple Rick's. The commercial presents this horrifying exploitation as a normal business practice. Nobody watching the commercial seems disturbed by the fact that a living person sits imprisoned and forced to relive a memory endlessly so that cookies can taste good. The Citadel Society accepts this level of cruelty as standard operating procedure. The factory essentially keeps Simple Rick in a state of perpetual torture, even though the memory itself brings happiness. The repetition without end, the inability to experience anything else, and the complete loss of freedom transforms a beautiful moment into a prison. Simple Rick cannot wake up, cannot see his actual daughter, cannot live his life. He exists only as a resource to be harvested for profit. The factory employs many Ricks as workers on the assembly line, where the cookies get packaged and prepared for sale. One of these workers is Rick J22, a Rick who spent 15 years working at the factory, performing the same repetitive tasks day after day. Rick J22 looks similar to other Ricks, but has a bald spot that extends all the way to his forehead. While working, he wears a factory uniform and a hairnet to comply with food safety regulations. Rick J22 feels deeply frustrated with his life because he knows he possesses the same intelligence as every other Rick. He understands everything about the universe, but the Citadel's class system stripped away everything that made him unique in his original dimension. By joining the Citadel Society, he became just another interchangeable worker, Rick, instead of the smartest person in his reality. His frustration reaches a breaking point when the regional manager, Rick, announces that he received a promotion to an even higher position. The manager tells all the workers that the supervisor position is now available. Rick J22 looks hopeful for a moment, thinking that after 15 years of loyal service, he might finally receive recognition and advancement. But the manager announces that Rick K83, known as Cool Rick among the workers, will become the new supervisor instead. Cool Rick only recently joined the Citadel, meaning he worked at the factory for much less time than Rick J22. This injustice proves too much for Rick J22 to handle. His frustration and rage explode into violence. He destroys his wafer assembly machine and murders the regional manager Rick in a fit of anger. He then enters the flavor core, the special room where Simple Rick sits imprisoned, and locks himself inside with Simple Rick as his only hostage. Rick J22 holds the factory hostage from inside the flavor core. Cop Ricks surround the building, trying to negotiate with him through megaphones. Rick J22 states his demands clearly. He wants a portal gun that is unregistered and untraceable, along with enough fluid to get him off what he calls a prison. He refers to the entire Citadel as a prison, rejecting the idea that the society offers any real freedom or opportunity. A crowd of other factory worker Ricks gathers outside. One of them yells encouragement to Rick J22, telling him to give them hell. The worker Ricks see J22 as a hero, standing up to the system that exploits them all. Eventually, the authorities agree to his demands and provide him with a portal gun. Rick J. 22 takes the portal gun and turns to Simple Rick, still strapped to the chair and trapped in his endless memory loop. Rick J. 22 attempts to rescue his hostage by firing what he believes is a portal to freedom. He grabs Simple Rick and pushes him through the portal, thinking he just saved an innocent victim of corporate exploitation. But the portal does not lead to freedom. Instead, it opens directly into the Blender dimension, a reality where anything that enters gets immediately destroyed. Simple Rick dies instantly upon entering the portal. Rick J. 22 realizes too late that the authorities tricked him. He exclaims that this represents the oldest trick in the book, understanding that they would never actually give him a working escape route. Before the situation can develop further, Rick D. Sanchez III himself arrives at the factory. He interrupts the SWAT team Ricks who were preparing to storm the Flavor Core and capture or kill Rick J. 22. Rick D. Sanchez III stops them and enters the Flavor Core alone. He speaks directly to Rick J. 22, praising him for having the courage to stand up against the bureaucratic system. He tells J. 22 that he spent enough time suffering as a factory worker and deserves his freedom. Rick D. Sanchez III claims that he admires J. 22's rebellious spirit and wants to reward him. He orders the SWAT team to stand down and personally escorts Rick J. 22 out of the Flavor Core. As they walk through the factory, all of Rick J. 22's co-workers cheer for him. They see him as a hero who spoke truth to power and won. Rick D. Sanchez III even provides a fancy limousine waiting outside for J. 22, suggesting that he will receive special treatment and recognition for his actions. Rick J. 22 becomes emotional, overcome with relief and gratitude. He believed he would die or spend the rest of his life in prison. Instead, the owner of the company appears to be rewarding him. As he walks toward the limousine with tears in his eyes, Rick D. Sanchez III suddenly pulls out a taser. He shoots Rick J. 22 inches the back of the neck without warning. Rick J. 22 collapses unconscious immediately. The whole speech about freedom and rebellion was a complete lie. Rick D. Sanchez III never intended to free Rick J. 22 or reform the system. He simply saw an opportunity to acquire a replacement for the Simple Rick that just died. Rick D. Sanchez III has Rick J. 22 strapped into the same chair where Simple Rick sat moments before. The same helmet gets placed on J. 22's head. The machines activate and begin forcing him to relive a specific memory on an endless loop. But this memory is different from the one Simple Rick experienced. Instead of reliving a moment of parental love, Rick J. 22 relives the memory of his rebellion. He relives the moment when he stood up to authority, killed his oppressor, and briefly tasted what felt like real freedom. The brain chemicals produced by this memory of liberation get harvested just like the chemicals from Simple Rick's memory of family love. Rick D. Sanchez III immediately develops this into a new product line. A new commercial airs shortly after these events. The same narrator returns with his warm, comforting voice. He tells the audience about a Rick who held a factory hostage after murdering his boss and several co-workers. The narrator explains that the factory made cookies and flavored them with lies. He states that this Rick made everyone take a look at what they were doing, and in the process, he got a taste of real freedom. The narrator continues by saying that they captured that taste, and they keep giving it to him so he can give it right back to the audience in every bite of new Simple Rick Freedom Wafer Selects. The commercial ends with the tagline asking viewers to come home to the unique flavor of shattering the grand illusion and to come home to Simple Rick. The word "it is real" appears on screen, a darkly ironic statement considering the entire situation represents a complete fabrication and manipulation. The story of Simple Rick and Rick J. 22 exposes the true nature of the Citadel society. The Citadel claims to offer Ricks a place where they can live among their own kind and build a civilization together. In reality, it recreates all the worst aspects of capitalist exploitation and class hierarchy. Powerful Ricks exploit worker Ricks despite the fact that they all possess identical intelligence and capabilities. The system treats Ricks as interchangeable resources rather than individuals with unique value. When worker Ricks rebel against this exploitation, the system absorbs even their rebellion and turns it into another product to be sold. The Citadel commodifies everything, including the deepest human emotions and the desire for freedom itself. Simple Rick represents a version of Rick who made different choices and lived a genuinely fulfilling life. He found happiness through simple pleasures, family connection, and honest work. The Citadel literally harvests that happiness, stealing it from him and selling it to others who can never find it naturally within their own exploitative society. The customers buying Simple Rick's wafers consume a synthetic approximation of the happiness they destroyed through their own life choices. They participate in the system that makes genuine happiness impossible, then purchase a product made from someone else's stolen joy. Rick J. 22's fate proves even more tragic. He recognized the lies of the Citadel and tried to escape. He murdered his oppressor and attempted to break free from the prison surrounding him. For one brief moment, he thought he succeeded. He thought his rebellion meant something, and that he earned his freedom. Instead, the system tricked him and transformed his moment of freedom into another product. Now he spends eternity reliving that moment while the feeling of liberation gets extracted from his brain and sold to the same worker Ricks he tried to inspire. His rebellion accomplished nothing except replacing one victim with another. The factory continues operating exactly as before, still exploiting imprisoned Ricks to flavor cookies, still maintaining the class hierarchy, still crushing any hope of real change. The Simple Rick's Wafer Cookie Factory demonstrates how the Citadel functions as a nightmare version of capitalist society. It strips away any pretense of ethics or human dignity. It openly advertises its exploitation because the society accepts this behavior as normal. The customers know exactly how the cookies get made, and they buy them anyway. They watch commercials showing a man imprisoned and having his brain harvested, and they find nothing wrong with this situation. The Citadel creates a world where Ricks oppress other Ricks, where intelligence and capability mean nothing without wealth and power, and where even the desire for freedom becomes just another commodity to be bought and sold. Simple Rick and Rick J. 22 both learned this lesson, though neither ever wakes up to understand what happened to them. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Moving on to C-137's transformed bodies, Pickle Rick, Tiny Rick, Toxic Rick, and Clean Rick. Rick Sanchez, from Dimension C-137, creates several alternate physical forms of himself throughout the series. These transformations represent different approaches to changing his body and mind through scientific experimentation. Each transformation produces unexpected consequences that reveal important truths about Rick's character and psychology. Unlike the Rick variants from different dimensions, these versions all originate from the same Rick, altered through his own technology and choices. The first and most famous transformation happens when Rick turns himself into a pickle. The morning starts with Morty hearing Rick's voice calling him from the garage. Morty finds a pickle lying on the workbench. Rick tells Morty to flip the pickle over. Morty hesitates, suspicious that this might be some kind of trick involving an alien body part. Rick insists, and when Morty flips the pickle, Rick reveals himself. He announces with pride that he turned himself into a pickle. Rick declares himself Pickle Rick and expects Morty to be impressed by this achievement. Morty asks if this represents the first part of some magic trick. Rick corrects him, explaining that he does science, not magic, and that one requires brains while the other requires dark eyeliner. Beth enters the garage with Summer, reminding everyone that they have an appointment downtown that was scheduled a week ago and agreed upon by everyone, including Rick. Rick claims the appointment completely slipped his mind. He expresses uncertainty about whether he can attend in his current pickle form. Morty immediately accuses Rick of doing this on purpose to get out of family counseling. Rick tells Morty to turn him, so they make eye contact. He assures Morty that he would never find a way to get out of family therapy, adding that he hopes his lack of fingers does not prevent Morty from perceiving his air quotes. Summer notices a syringe hanging directly above Rick on a timer. Rick claims the syringe contains a serum that will reverse the pickle transformation. He states that he created the pickle form to challenge himself, and it could take hours or even days before he figures out how to return to human form. Beth decides to leave Rick at home to work on reversing the transformation. The moment the family leaves, a cat named Izzy knocks Pickle Rick off the workbench. He rolls outside into the sunlight. Rick complains about the possibility of dying as a pickle from heat exposure, comparing it to the mega genius equivalent of dying on the toilet. Rain suddenly starts falling, saving him from dehydration. The water washes him into a sewer drain. Rick finds himself in the sewer system, unable to move on his own. He creates pickle juice to attract a cockroach. When the cockroach approaches, Rick bites down on its head and kills it. He removes parts from the cockroach's brain and uses them to create a system that allows him to move by controlling the dead insect's nervous system. Rick builds increasingly complex structures from cockroach and rat parts, creating limbs and weapons from the creatures he kills. Rick's adventures in the sewer lead him into a secret government facility. He fights his way through multiple armed guards, killing many people during his escape attempt. The facility's director refers to Rick as Solanya, an old legend about a pickle man. Rick eventually makes his way to the therapist's office where his family sits in session with Dr. Wong. He arrives covered in blood and rat parts, still in pickle form. Beth asks if he still has the syringe. Rick admits the syringe contains a serum he needs to stay alive after sustaining significant damage. Dr. Wong points out that the serum will change him from a pickle back to a human. She asks Rick why he lied to his daughter. Rick admits he lied so he would not have to come to therapy. When asked why he did not want to attend, Rick explains that he does not respect therapy because he is a scientist. He states that he invents, transforms, creates, and destroys for a living, and when he dislikes something about the world, he changes it. Rick eventually injects himself with the serum and transforms back into human form. He coughs up what appears to be pickle brine. The family drives home together. Rick apologizes for lying to get out of the appointment and admits he should not lie to Beth. The transformation accomplished exactly what Rick intended. He avoided therapy through an extreme physical transformation that made attendance seem impossible. The second major transformation involves Rick transferring his consciousness into a younger clone of himself. Summer asks Rick if he could use his knowledge to turn himself into a teenager and help hunt down a vampire at their high school. Rick initially dismisses the idea, but later decides to do exactly that. He goes to his garage and transfers his mind into a younger clone body. The teenage version introduces himself as Tiny Rick. He appears enthusiastic and energetic, greeting Summer and Morty by asking who wants to hunt a vampire. Tiny Rick successfully helps them identify and kill Coach Ferratu, the vampire posing as their gym teacher. After killing the vampire, Rick plans to return to his original body. However, Toby Matthews, a popular student, asks Summer if they can have a party at her house and specifically requests that Tiny Rick attend. Rick agrees to stay in the younger body so they can have the party. He asks if he should bring some beer. Summer cannot believe Rick would stay as Tiny Rick just for a party. Rick celebrates the decision enthusiastically. Tiny Rick becomes extremely popular at school. He charms teachers and students with his confident personality and easygoing attitude. Principal Vagina later describes Tiny Rick as an 80-year-old man in a teenager's body. The teenage brain begins overpowering Rick's original consciousness. Rick's actual personality, trapped inside the younger brain, tries desperately to communicate that something is wrong. He draws pictures showing himself crying for help. He writes songs with lyrics begging someone to let him out, stating that what people see is not the same person, that his life is a lie, that his real body is slowly dying in a vat, and asking if anyone is listening or can understand. Summer immediately recognizes these as cries for help. Morty refuses to believe anything is wrong because he enjoys having a popular grandfather. Summer theorizes that when Rick put his mind into the young brain, it did what young brains do. It shoved the bad thoughts into the back and built a wall around them. Those bad thoughts represent the real Rick, the fact that he is old, the fact that everyone will die one day, the fact that the universe is so big, nothing in it matters. Those facts define who Rick really is. The original Rick is trapped inside and can only emerge through Tiny Rick's teenage angst. Summer gets Tiny Rick expelled from school in an attempt to force him back into his original body. Tiny Rick responds by trying to destroy his old body completely. Summer and Morty physically stop him and force him back into the original Rick body. Once returned to his elderly form, Rick declares Operation Phoenix a failure. Operation Phoenix refers to Rick's system of clone bodies that allow his consciousness to transfer between them, potentially giving him immortality through endless body swapping. Rick takes an axe and brutally murders all his clone bodies, including Tiny Rick. He takes particular care to mutilate the Tiny Rick clone for the trouble it caused. The clones sit in tanks filled with hyperbaric quantum fluid that preserves living tissue. The third transformation splits Rick into two separate physical beings through a detoxification machine. After a 6-day adventure that brings both Rick and Morty to the edge of psychological collapse, Rick decides they need a vacation. They visit an alien spa that offers various relaxation services. The final treatment involves a detoxification machine that promises to completely remove a person's toxins. Rick and Morty enter the machine together. They suddenly find themselves in a toxic, gooey world filled with monsters. Rick realizes they did not die in an explosion. Instead, the machine worked exactly as designed. The machine removed their toxins and created physical bodies for those extracted toxins. Rick and Morty looking around in the toxic dimension are not the real Rick and Morty. They are the toxins that got removed. Toxic Rick explains to Toxic Morty that they represent everything the original Rick and Morty consider toxic about themselves. Toxic Rick embodies all of Rick's arrogance, cruelty, need to control everything, and violent tendencies. He screams insults at Toxic Morty, calling him worthless and stating that he controls the universe. Toxic Morty represents all of Morty's fear, anxiety, self-loathing, and insecurity. He constantly expresses terror and believes he is worthless. Meanwhile, the detoxified versions of Rick and Morty return home believing the process succeeded perfectly. The healthy Rick becomes polite, considerate, and apologetic. He regrets his past rude behavior toward the spa employee and offers to make the family a nice meal with fresh basil. He no longer displays any of his typical aggression or superiority complex. The healthy Morty loses all his insecurity and fear. His confidence soars immediately. He becomes popular at school and starts successfully dating multiple women. He moves to New York City and becomes a stockbroker, displaying a complete lack of empathy or conscience in his business dealings. The healthy versions lack crucial parts of their personalities. Toxic Rick and Toxic Morty escape from the detoxification tank. Toxic Rick contacts the healthy Rick, claiming he wants to merge back together. He tricks the healthy Rick into bringing the tank back to Earth. The plan involves switching places so the toxic versions can escape while trapping the healthy versions inside. The healthy Morty refuses to merge, recognizing that accepting his toxic traits back would destroy his newfound success. A woman named Stacy, who Morty brought to the switching location, accidentally gets trapped in the toxic dimension when the plan fails. Toxic Rick and Toxic Morty end up released into the real world alongside their healthy counterparts. Toxic Rick decides that if he cannot merge with his other half, he will make the entire world toxic instead. He uses a moonlight tower and 2 miniverse batteries to broadcast toxic energy across the planet. The toxicity spreads rapidly, affecting everyone it touches. People abandon their normal behavior and act on their worst impulses. Religious people stop believing in God and start engaging in sexual acts in church. People who normally eat healthy food start eating garbage. Children at a birthday party murder the entertainment mascot. The healthy Rick initially refuses to stop this, arguing that he has no right to choose which worlds get saved or destroyed. The healthy Morty slaps Rick across the face, and Rick suddenly realizes something important. Rick understands that the detoxification machine removes toxicity based on each person's individual definition of what they consider toxic. The machine cannot objectively determine toxicity for every being in the universe. It must rely on the user's personal beliefs. Rick considers his irrational attachments to people, particularly Morty, to be a toxic weakness. This means Toxic Rick inherited that emotional attachment. Rick shoots Toxic Morty with a poison that will kill him. He threatens to let Toxic Morty die unless Toxic Rick agrees to merge. Toxic Rick initially calls this a bluff, but Rick increases the poison dose. Toxic Rick agrees to merge in order to save Toxic Morty. The two Ricks combine back into a single being. Rick returns to his normal self, possessing both his intelligence and his cruelty, both his caring and his arrogance. Rick then forcibly remerges Toxic Morty with healthy Morty, using flying drones to hold him down. Morty protests but cannot escape. He transforms back into his regular self, regaining all his insecurity and self-loathing along with his capacity for genuine emotion and empathy. Rick reverses the toxicity beam, removing the toxic influence from everyone on Earth. People return to their normal behavior patterns. The world returns to its previous state. These 3 transformations reveal different aspects of Rick's character through physical changes. Pickle Rick shows Rick's willingness to undergo extreme body modification to avoid emotional vulnerability. The transformation succeeds in helping him escape therapy, but forces him to confront violence and survival in ways that make his avoidance seem absurd. Tiny Rick demonstrates what happens when Rick tries to reclaim youth and shed the burdens of age and experience. The teenage body threatens to erase everything that makes Rick himself, proving that his darkness and despair form essential parts of his identity. Toxic Rick and Clean Rick split Rick into 2 incomplete halves, showing that his worst qualities and his capacity for love cannot be separated without destroying what makes him functional. Each transformation ultimately fails because Rick cannot escape himself through physical changes alone. Pickle Rick must return to human form. Tiny Rick must give up youth and accept his aging body. Toxic Rick and Clean Rick must merge because neither can survive or function properly alone. The transformations teach Rick that his identity exists beyond any single physical form, but that certain aspects of his personality require his specific body and brain chemistry to maintain. He cannot simply engineer away the parts of himself he dislikes without losing the parts he needs to survive. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Moving on to Decoy Ricks, Clone Ricks, and Backup Ricks, revealed in Mortiplicity and Beyond. Decoy Ricks, Clone Ricks, and Backup Ricks revealed in Mortiplicity and Beyond. Rick Sanchez from Dimension C 137 creates entire categories of artificial versions of himself and his family. These copies exist for different purposes, but share one important characteristic. They all believe themselves to be the original Rick at the moment of their creation. Some are meant as decoys to take bullets intended for the real family. Others serve as backup bodies for Rick's consciousness if he dies. The episode titled Mortiplicity explores what happens when these systems spiral completely out of control. The results prove catastrophic for nearly everyone involved. The episode begins with Rick and his family eating breakfast together. Rick announces that God is real and has been sleeping for thousands of years. He tells everyone that he and Morty are going to sneak up into the clouds and kill God. Beth interrupts to tell everyone that Jerry is getting a job interview. Rick immediately recognizes something is wrong with this situation. Squid-like creatures break into the house and systematically shoot everyone in the family one by one. The camera pulls back to reveal that this family are robotic duplicates. Somewhere else, Rick's watch activates an alarm showing that someone just killed a decoy family. This Rick gathers his family and explains that a lot of people want a piece of him because he is cool, and it makes them feel bad. After the trouble with Space Beth, he made passable copies of the family and placed them around the country as a buffer zone to protect the real family. The decoys go on fun, self-contained terrestrial adventures, and take bullets meant for the originals. Rick announces they need to leave immediately because squids just killed a decoy family. The family packs and prepares to evacuate. Before they can escape, the same squid creatures break in and kill this family too. The scene cuts to yet another Smith family receiving an alert about decoy deaths. Rick realizes what happened and explains the situation to his family. The problem extends far beyond simple decoys. Rick made decoy families, but those decoys made their own decoys without Rick's knowledge or permission. Those second-generation decoys created third-generation decoys. The process continued for multiple generations. Now all the decoys are becoming aware of other decoys they did not create. Each decoy, Rick believes himself to be the original. Each decoy family thinks they represent the real Smith family. When they encounter other versions, they assume those versions must be eliminated. Rick warns that when you get far enough down the decoy line, things start getting weird. He asks if anyone has ever made a copy of a copy. The quality degrades significantly with each generation. The families begin hunting each other across the country. Multiple Smith families encounter each other and immediately start fighting. One family burns another family alive with a flamethrower, only to declare that those families were already killing each other anyway. Rick explains this phenomenon as an Asimov cascade. The decoys lie anywhere and everywhere. Nobody knows how many total decoys exist. Beth insists they should eliminate the squids that started this mess. Rick agrees, but warns that the squids seem very good at taking out Smith families. He suggests the family disguise themselves as squids using poorly made costumes. Summer complains that the costume smells terrible. The disguised family tracks down a squid ship and attacks it. They shoot down the ship and board it, looking for information about squid weaknesses. When Rick removes one squid's helmet, he discovers the truth. The squids are decoys wearing disguises. The squids represent another layer of decoy families trying to eliminate all other decoys. A badly injured decoy, Jerry appears and throws an explosive device, killing the family that just discovered this information. A montage shows multiple decoy families killing each other in various ways across different locations. One family appears living in Italy, with their Morty tossing a peach back and forth with an older man. Another family runs through woods. They notice it becoming too quiet right before getting tranquilized and captured. Their captors reveal themselves as extremely poorly made decoys. These decoys look like crude scarecrows with barely human features. The scarecrow, Rick explains that Rick's making decoys started getting lazy. Each new generation of decoys received less attention and craftsmanship. Far enough down the line, truly monstrous versions emerged. The scarecrow Rick plans to remove the captured family's skin and use it to make his own family look more normal. Before he can begin the procedure, another family bursts in and rescues the captives. This family calls themselves the Glockenspiel family because they are made entirely of wood. Everything from their bodies to their car is constructed from carved wood. Glockenspiel Rick drives the rescued family to a hidden canyon location. He presses his hand to a sensor on the canyon wall. A door opens, revealing a massive hall filled with decoy families. Glockenspiel Jerry walks around holding a can of varnish, suggesting it represents a ticket to the world beyond the river. Glockenspiel Summer rejects this idea, stating she craves glorious death in decoy battle. Glockenspiel Morty points out that depending on the varnish used, it might end up looking like blackface. Glockenspiel Beth addresses the crowd of decoys from a podium. She tells them they are no longer Ricks and Mortys, Beths and Jerrys, or also Summers. She attempts to unite the decoys against the violence consuming them all. Before she can finish her speech, other decoys find the hideout and attack. The battle destroys everyone except Glockenspiel Jerry, who runs away to save himself while everyone else dies. The violence escalates further. One decoy Rick decides to end the cascade permanently. He activates a beacon that summons all remaining decoy families to one location for a massive battle royale. The beacon attracts countless decoys from across the country. They all converge on the location and immediately start killing each other. The battle rages until only one family remains standing. That final family believes they won and prove themselves as the original. Before they can celebrate, Mr. Always Wants to Be Hunted appears. Mr. Always Wants to Be Hunted is a small alien that the family encountered at the beginning of the episode. He wore a target costume and kept asking to be hunted. The family ignored him. Now he kills the final decoy family because they never hunted him as requested. Meanwhile, Glockenspiel Jerry floats down a river on a piece of wood. Time passes rapidly around him. A tribe of beavers finds him and incorporates him into their dam. More time passes. The world becomes desolate and empty. Even more time passes. Cowboys appear, suggesting a new civilization emerged. Eventually, the world progresses to the point where Christianity gets reinvented. The episode's final scene reveals that the real Smith family was never on Earth during any of these events. They return from a space adventure with Space Beth. Rick receives an alert about the decoy crisis happening on the planet below. The real Summer, Morty, and Jerry have no dialogue in the episode except through their decoy counterparts. Only Rick and Beth speak in the final scene. The entire episode depicted nothing but decoys killing decoys, while the originals remained safely off-planet. The decoy system represents one of Rick's contingency plans, but it failed catastrophically. Rick never programmed the decoys with instructions preventing them from making additional decoys. He never considered that his own personality, copied into artificial bodies, would immediately start creating backup plans. Every decoy Rick thought exactly like the original. Every decoy Rick feared death and wanted protection. Every decoy Rick had the knowledge and resources to create more copies. The exponential growth of decoys was inevitable given Rick's psychology. The different types of decoys show the degradation Rick warned about. The first generation decoys appear nearly identical to the originals. They function as robots with synthetic flesh and full cognitive abilities. The second and third generations maintain similar quality. By the fourth or fifth generation, quality starts declining noticeably. Further generations show increasingly poor craftsmanship. The scarecrow decoys barely resemble humans. Their bodies look crude and incomplete. The wooden Glockenspiel decoys represent an entirely different material choice, suggesting a Rick with limited resources who worked with available materials. Each generation of decoy making, Rick put in less effort than the previous generation. Operation Phoenix represents Rick's separate clone system, designed for a different purpose. This system creates backup bodies that preserve Rick's consciousness after death. The system first appears in the episode Big Trouble in Little Sanchez, when Rick transfers his mind into a younger clone body. At the end of that episode, Rick takes Morty and Summer into an underground dungeon beneath his garage. The dungeon contains multiple glass chambers. Each chamber holds a Rick clone in various stages of development. The clones float in hyperbaric quantum fluid that preserves living tissue. Rick declares Operation Phoenix a failure after his experience as Tiny Rick. He takes an axe and viciously butchers all the clone bodies. He destroys them completely while still naked and fresh from the preservation chamber. The destruction of his clone bodies creates a problem later. In the episode Edge of Tomorty, Rick Die Rickpeat, Morty accidentally kills Rick during an adventure. Rick's body gets impaled on a spiked rock after flying through the ship's windshield. A hologram Rick appears and guides Morty through the beginning of Operation Phoenix. Morty is supposed to take a tissue sample from Rick's corpse and place it into the clone compiler. Rick's consciousness should upload into the new clone body. However, Rick destroyed his clone vat offline 2 seasons ago. Without local clones available, Rick's consciousness uploads into clone bodies that other Ricks built in alternate dimensions. Rick's mind jumps between different alternate universe clone bodies every time he dies. He wakes up first in Fascist Rick's body, discovering a reality controlled by fascist ideology. Fascist Morty captures him and shoots Fascist Rick to teach the new Rick a lesson. Rick dies again and wakes in Shrimp Rick's body, where everything is shrimp-based. He continues dying and resurrecting through multiple bizarre realities. Eventually, he wakes as Wasp Rick in a dimension populated by intelligent wasps. Wasp Rick proves benevolent and helps the original Rick's consciousness return to his home dimension. Once there, Rick finally convinces Morty to create a new clone body. Rick's consciousness transfers into this body, returning him to his original form. Operation Phoenix reveals that Rick built a backup system that works across dimensions. Every time a Rick dies, the system checks for local clones first. If no local clones exist, it searches other dimensions for active Operation Phoenix facilities. The consciousness transfers to whichever working system it finds. This means Rick inadvertently connected to networks built by alternate Ricks who continued the project. Most of those alternate Ricks created fascist societies, suggesting dark things about where Rick's unchecked intellect leads without emotional bonds or moral restraint. The system later gets upgraded. In the episode Rick Mirai Jack, Operation Phoenix can clone both Rick's and Morty's while preserving their original appearances. Evil Morty sabotages the system during his escape from the Citadel. He reroutes Operation Phoenix so that any Rick or Morty trying to resurrect gets transferred into clone vats on the Citadel. Those vats immediately blend the clone bodies with the consciousness inside. Evil Morty uses the blended biological material to power his portal weapon. Many Ricks and Mortys die trying to escape through Operation Phoenix, never realizing the system has been compromised. In Mort Ragnarok, Rick uses Operation Phoenix repeatedly to resurrect himself after dying and entering Valhalla. He exploits the afterlife as an energy source by dying, entering Valhalla, stealing energy, and resurrecting through Operation Phoenix. When Bigfoot joins the resurrection cycle, the system initially drops him into a clone of Summer before Rick engineers a custom human body for Bigfoot's use. This shows Operation Phoenix can now create clones for multiple individuals and customize body types. The system has security features that detect external threats. If something tries to destroy a backup body from outside, the security system releases the clone in a mindless, animalistic state so it can at least attempt to defend itself. Both systems, Point C, the decoys, and Operation Phoenix, Point C, share fundamental problems. Rick creates artificial versions of himself that possess his memories, intelligence, and personality. These versions naturally act like Rick, which means they immediately start creating their own backup plans. The decoys make more decoys because that is what Rick would do. The Operation Phoenix clones in other dimensions exist because other Ricks continued the project Rick abandoned. Every version of Rick reaches similar conclusions and builds similar safety systems. This creates cascading networks of artificial Ricks that nobody fully controls. The decoy families demonstrate another problem with copying consciousness and identity. Each decoy genuinely believes itself to be the original. The decoys feel fear, love their families, and want to survive. When Glockenspiel Jerry holds the can of varnish and talks about the world beyond the river, he expresses real hope for escape and life. When the family standing in the ocean accepts death with smiles, they show genuine peace and acceptance. These artificial beings possess complete psychological depth. They suffer and die believing they were the real Smith family. The distinction between original and copy becomes philosophically meaningless once the copies gain full consciousness and autonomy. Rick creating artificial versions of himself and his family raises questions about identity, consciousness, and what makes someone real. The decoys were built to die so the originals could live, but they do not know they are decoys. From their perspective, they are the real family living real lives until violence destroys them. Operation Phoenix lets Rick cheat death, but it means new versions of Rick wake up in clone bodies without knowing if they are the original consciousness or a perfect copy. If you copy someone perfectly, including memories and personality, does the distinction between original and copy actually matter? Rick's technologies force these philosophical questions into brutal, concrete reality. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Moving on to memory constructed and simulated Ricks from inner minds and fake realities. Memory Rick appears inside Bird Person's mindscape in Rickternal Friendshine of the Spotless Mort. Simulation Ricks exist inside virtual reality systems created by Zaggaryon aliens in M. Night Shame aliens. These Ricks come from memories and computer programs instead of actual flesh and blood. Some versions know they are not real. Other versions think they are the original. After the family leaves for a cruise in Season 5, Episode 8, Rick stays home to work on Bird Person. Rick keeps Bird Person's body in pieces after their fight at his wedding in Star Mort Rickturn of the Jerry. Rick removes cybernetic parts and tries bringing him back to life. Bird Person wakes up for 1 second, sees Rick, then falls unconscious again. Rick's garage AI reports that Bird Person hid his conscious mind inside his unconscious mind. Both Rick and Bird Person start having seizures. The AI calls neighbor Gene for help, asking him to bring batteries and solar panels. Rick enters Bird Person's mind to save him. If someone dies inside their friend's brain, they die in real life. Rick arrives naked in a memory of their meeting at Birding Man, an alien music festival. Rick uses a bystander to find Bird Person. He travels through a memory of Rick, Bird Person, and other Citadel of Rick agents in battle. Rick lands in a memory of Rick, Bird Person, Squanchy, and several resistance fighters planning the Battle of Blood Ridge. Memory Rick notices the real Rick. Real Rick explains that Memory Rick is just a sentient memory. Memory Rick understands basic concepts about Rick, but gets details wrong. For example, Memory Rick knows Rick's portal gun creates a green circle, but does not understand it creates actual portals. This happens because Memory Rick exists as Bird Person's faulty recollection of who Rick truly is. Real Rick incapacitates Memory Rick and finishes a device that lets him track Bird Person through his mind. Rick finds Bird Person watching a memory of him and Tammy together. Bird Person rejects Rick's rescue attempt and flies away. Gromflamite soldiers attack. Memory Rick joins Real Rick in the fight. The two Ricks win and go searching for Bird Person. Memory Rick enters memories suppressed by the Federation after Bird Person's transformation into Phoenix Person. Real Rick finds Bird Person making bombs out of rage. When Bird Person sees Rick, he detonates the bombs, trying to destroy his own mind. Bird Person explains he died at his wedding and is waiting for it to take effect. Memory Rick sees the death as the tree in Bird Person's mind begins collapsing. The Ricks run. Real Rick stops at the memory of his fight with Bird Person in Star Mort Rickturn of the Jerry, defeats Memory Bird Person, and orders himself in the memory to give him his clothes. The Ricks track Bird Person to a large red crystalline tree. They split up. Rick uses a memory gun from Morty's Mind Blowers, as a portal gun to jump between past events while making their way out of Bird Person's collapsing unconscious mind. Rick discovers a memory showing Bird Person and Tammy have a daughter. The Federation inhibited this memory from Bird Person. Real Rick does not reveal this information until he faces mortal danger and needs it to convince Bird Person to wake up. Rick and Bird Person track down Bird Person's central body, where he cherishes his relationship with Tammy, blissfully unaware of her treachery. Memory versions of Tammy and Phoenix Person hunt them down. Tammy reveals she loved Bird Person more than the Federation before sacrificing herself. Rick and Bird Person barely escape. Bird Person revives in the real world and leaves to find his daughter. After Bird Person leaves, Rick finds his younger self hiding in memories of his childhood. Young Rick appears afraid of the person he will become. Rick also found a memory showing him trying to sell Bird Person on adventures after the Battle of Blood Ridge. Rick explained he can take Bird Person to the same battlefield in universes where they lost, won, or where the war never happened. Rick said all realities are equally real and equally unreal, and none of it matters. Bird Person asked why Rick helped if nothing matters. Rick admitted Bird Person matters to him. Memory Rick fights exactly like Rick would fight. Memory Rick makes jokes and acts sarcastic. Memory Rick assists with plans and strategies. The version represents how Bird Person remembers Rick from their early friendship days. Younger, more idealistic, and prone to emotion. Memory Rick dresses like Han Solo from Star Wars. Post-credits scene reveals that Bird Person and Tammy's daughter is kept in a prison with other inmates. As she brutally kills several prisoners, guards remark that putting all violent prisoners together may not have been the best idea. Rick's younger memory self mentions he has a pubescent memory of my older self in my closet that he needs to deal with. This implies Memory Rick somehow transferred into real Rick's mind, though Rick dismisses this concern. The episode title references the film Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, which Rick calls Charlie Kaufman bullshit that he wants to avoid. Rick explicitly tells Bird Person before entering his mind that he could simply hop timelines to find a version of Bird Person that suits him best. Rick chooses not to do this. Rick does everything possible to get the real Bird Person back. The Season 1 Episode 4M, Night Shame Aliens, opens with Rick dissecting a large rat in the garage, complaining about sloppy craftsmanship. Morty comments on the beautiful day before robotic Beth gets in a car and leaves for work. Rick acts suspicious of the day's events. Morty leaves for school. Mr. Goldenfold calls Morty to the front of math class and asks him to teach, despite Morty giving seemingly incorrect answers. Jessica and other students suddenly want to be Morty's friend if he gives them Rick's recipe for concentrated dark matter. Rick shoots a laser pistol and declares a family emergency. Rick tells Morty to get naked as they scramble into locker room showers. Rick explains they are trapped in a simulation of real life by Zaggaryons, intergalactic scammers, who are the galaxy's most ambitious but least successful con artists. Rick says they will be safe if naked because the alien race is immensely uncomfortable with nudity. Jerry was accidentally abducted into the simulation too. Jerry calmly goes through the day's events without noticing numerous glitches. His simulation runs on very low capacity. Prince Nebulon orders Jerry's sector capped at 5% processing with settings on auto. Zaggaryons will deal with Jerry later. Rick Sanchez is the target. Jerry drives to work, listening to human music on Earth radio. He likes it. Jerry gives a pitch for an Apple marketing slogan, "Hungry for apples?" The board members approve. Jerry fills with unbounded confidence and promptly leaves to make love to simulated Beth. Beth's simulation does not even take clothes off or move, but Jerry declares it the best sex of his life. Rick and Morty plan an impromptu rap concert while naked. Rick orders the crowd to perform a wide variety of actions to saturate RAM and freeze the CPU, thus freezing the simulation. The duo manages to escape the simulation, sneaks into the ship, steals crystallized core processing units, and proceeds to an escape pod. As they fly back to Earth and return to the garage, Rick enters the passcode to a hidden safe. The safe refuses to open. The garage melts away, proving they remain trapped inside the simulation. Prince Nebulon appears and taunts Rick for thinking he escaped. The Zaggaryons reveal they always had the recipe for concentrated dark matter. Rick pulls Morty's pants down to cause a diversion. The aliens become extremely uncomfortable, leading to a chase throughout the ship. Rick explains the Zaggaryons have been trying to outsmart him for years. Every time they do, Rick is one step ahead. Back in Jerry's simulation, Jerry returns to work to confess his slogan is a ripoff of "Got Milk?" His boss is caught in an infinite loop of snapping fingers and saying, yes. In 1 minute, Jerry is fired, rehired, promoted, and nominated for an Appley Award, a fictional award Jerry made up seconds earlier. Rick explains the simulation chamber operates like a treadmill. The virtual world disappears behind them and is rendered in front of them as they move through it. While frozen, they can get to the edge. Rick jumps off the edge with Morty following. Zaggaryons planned this, laughing about the mindfuck they created. Rick finds the central processing room. He grabs as many processors as he can carry, noting these guys are not good at much but really good at making chips. Rick returns to the garage safe, enters the code, and the safe opens. Rick and Morty celebrate escaping. The scene reveals they remain in another simulation. A simulation inside a simulation, inside another giant simulation. Prince Nebulon appears again, declaring, "We never had the recipe for concentrated dark matter, but we do now. We do now, sucka!" Rick gets angry that they simulated Morty's genitalia. Kevin from the Zaggaryon crew fought real hard to supervise that project. Other crew members shame Kevin for this. Rick pretends to accept defeat. Prince Nebulon takes a picture of Rick's face while Rick tries figuring out if he is still in a simulation. Prince Nebulon clarifies he does not have discolored butthole flaps. That was part of the simulation. His assistant asks if the doctor's appointment should be cancelled. Prince Nebulon says no, keep it, and move it up if possible. Rick and Jerry fly through space in an escape pod. Jerry draws with his finger on the pod's condensed window pane, looking dejected. Rick tries comforting Jerry about the most meaningful day of his life, being a simulation operating at minimum capacity. Jerry tells Rick those guys took him for a ride too, and Rick should have respect for the dummies of the universe now that he is one of them. Rick agrees Jerry might be right. The scene changes to the alien ship. Zaggaryons celebrate acquiring Rick's formula by using it immediately. They add ingredients one by one into a bowl. The formula Rick gave them is wrong. Rick tells simulated Morty that concentrated dark matter is 2 parts plutonic quarks, pink, and 1 part cesium, green. When aliens attempt making it, the chemical containers are swapped, reversing quantities. The ship explodes, killing all Zaggaryons. Post-credits scene shows drunk Rick entering Morty's room at night with a knife. Rick demands to know if Morty is a simulation. Morty's earnest terror convinces Rick of his innocence. Rick apologizes before passing out. The episode demonstrates that simulation Ricks behave exactly like real Rick. Simulation Morty, in the final layer, also behaves exactly like real Morty. Each simulated Rick has full memories, intelligence, and personality. The simulated versions naturally act like Rick would act. They get frustrated, make plans, try escaping, and outsmart their captors. Simulation Ricks exist at multiple nested levels. First layer simulation, Rick realizes something is wrong and tries escaping. Second layer simulation, Rick also figures out the trick and attempts escape. The outermost real Rick stays ahead of everyone by giving false information that will cause the Zaggaryon ship to explode. Each simulation, Rick genuinely believes itself to be the original. The distinction between original and copy becomes philosophically meaningless once copies gain full consciousness and autonomy. However, unlike the decoy Ricks from Mortyplicity, who were physical robots, simulation Ricks exist only as digital constructs inside alien computers running virtual reality chambers. The Zaggaryons specifically designed the simulations to extract information from Rick by making him feel comfortable enough to reveal secrets. They simulated Rick's garage, his family, and his daily life. The simulations included responsive AI for all characters. When Rick comments on Beth being robotic, he notes how sophisticated and responsive the simulation is, even running in real time. The episode title references filmmaker M. Night Shyamalan and his tendency toward twist endings. The simulation structure provides multiple twists as Rick discovers each new layer. Prince Nebulon serves as the main antagonist, voiced by Dan Harmon, co-creator of the show. The Zaggaryons built simulation chambers as elaborate schemes to steal valuable technology from intelligent beings. Their method involves trapping targets in realistic virtual environments, where targets will voluntarily reveal information. The plan fails because Rick outsmarts them at every level, ultimately destroying their entire operation with false information. Jerry's simulation sector demonstrates the aliens can run simulations at different quality levels. Jerry's 5% processing allocation means his environment has obvious glitches. Background uses the same 3 stores on repeat when Jerry drives. Jerry fails to notice because he is, as Rick frequently says, not very observant or intelligent. The episode reveals that the Zaggaryons consider nudity highly uncomfortable, making it a reliable escape method for Rick. This species trait allows Rick to disrupt their monitoring and create chaos during critical moments. The weakness proves essential to Rick's ability to navigate their systems and ultimately defeat their plan. Simulation technology appears throughout the series in various forms. The Zaggaryons represent one specific alien race, using simulations for theft and deception. Their particular simulation chambers use nanobotic renderings to create false realities. The technology requires significant processing power and can be overwhelmed by complex simultaneous calculations. Memory Rick comes from organic brain activity. Simulation Ricks come from computer programs. Memory Rick has limitations based on how accurately Bird Person remembers Rick. Simulation Ricks have limitations based on computer processing power and programming quality. Memory Rick knows he is not real once told. Simulation Ricks do not know they are simulations unless they figure it out. Memory Rick cooperates with real Rick immediately after learning the truth. Simulation Ricks continue trying to escape even after discovering multiple simulation layers. Memory Rick serves Bird Person's psychological needs. Simulation Ricks serve the Zaggaryons' criminal goals. Memory Rick helps save Bird Person's life. Simulation Ricks unknowingly help attempt theft of Rick's technology. Both types represent artificial versions of Rick, with full intelligence and personality. Both can think, plan, fight, and solve problems exactly like real Rick. Both demonstrate that creating a functional copy of Rick requires more than just appearance. It requires his complete mental framework, memories, and decision-making processes. The episodes show different methods of creating Rick copies. Bird Person's mind naturally constructed Memory Rick from years of real experiences together. The Zaggaryons artificially programmed simulation Ricks based on intelligence gathering about Rick's behavior and personality. Memory Rick has authentic emotional connections to the memories he inhabits. Simulation Ricks have no authentic connections. Everything in their environment is artificially constructed. Memory Rick's existence serves a therapeutic purpose within Bird Person's healing process. Simulation Rick's existence serves only as tools for the Zaggaryons' attempted heist. Both episodes explore the question of what makes someone real. If a copy has all the same thoughts, memories, and personality as the original, what separates them? The show suggests that consciousness and autonomy matter more than physical form or origin. Both Memory Rick and Simulation Ricks demonstrate genuine intelligence and agency within their respective contexts. The episodes also examine Rick's relationship to himself. Memory Rick represents how Bird Person sees Rick as a younger, more idealistic friend from their rebellion days. Simulation Ricks represent how outsiders see Rick as a genius scientist with valuable secrets worth stealing. Neither version captures the full complexity of C-137 Rick, but both reflect genuine aspects of who Rick is to different people in his life. Memory Rick operates within Bird Person's mental landscape. His reality consists entirely of Bird Person's recollections and subconscious processes. When the red crystalline tree collapses, Memory Rick's entire universe ends. He understands this fate and accepts it as part of his nature as a memory construct. This acceptance shows Memory Rick possesses self-awareness about his own existence. Simulation Ricks believe they inhabit real physical space. They think they are escaping actual danger and solving real problems. The Zaggaryons designed this deception deliberately. The aliens need their targets to believe the simulation is reality. Otherwise, targets will not reveal genuine information. This fundamental difference in awareness separates Memory Rick's experience from Simulation Rick's experience. Memory Rick willingly helps real Rick, despite knowing he is not the original. Memory Rick fights alongside real Rick, provides tactical support, and navigates dangerous situations in Bird Person's mind. Memory Rick accepts his role as a construct serving a larger purpose. Simulation Ricks never get this opportunity because they never learn the truth before the Zaggarion ship explodes. The Simulation Ricks die, believing they are real, never understanding their true nature as computer programs designed to be exploited. Rick's attitude toward these copies reveals his complicated relationship with identity and consciousness. Rick treats Memory Rick as a useful tool once Memory Rick understands his nature. Rick does not hesitate to incapacitate Memory Rick at their first meeting. Rick also does not mourn Memory Rick's potential destruction when Bird Person's mind collapses. However, Rick works alongside Memory Rick as a partner once Memory Rick proves useful. Rick shows no emotional attachment to Simulation Ricks because he knows they are fake. Rick manipulates them without guilt, using their false beliefs against the Zaggaryons. Rick's willingness to destroy simulation versions of himself demonstrates his pragmatic view of consciousness. Authentic continuity matters more than instantaneous copies, regardless of how perfect those copies might be. The episodes raise questions about whether Rick could distinguish himself from a perfect copy if placed in the same situation. Would Rick's methods of escaping simulation differ from Simulation Rick's methods? The answer appears to be no. Simulation Ricks use exactly the same tactics real Rick would use. They freeze the simulation by overwhelming processors, they search for central processing rooms, they steal technology, and they attempt to manipulate their captors. The only difference between real Rick and Simulation Rick comes down to which version the narrative follows and which version receives complete information. Real Rick succeeds because he operates outside the simulation with full knowledge. Simulation Ricks fail because they operate inside the simulation with incomplete knowledge. This creates a philosophical problem about the nature of Rick's genius. If Simulation Ricks can perfectly replicate Rick's intelligence and behavior, does that mean Rick's consciousness is reducible to computational processes? The show does not answer this directly. Instead, it presents Rick as someone who recognizes the problem but refuses to dwell on existential implications. Rick focuses on practical outcomes, saving Bird Person, destroying the Zaggaryons, protecting his family. Rick leaves philosophical questions about consciousness and identity for others to worry about while he handles immediate threats. Memory Rick and Simulation Ricks demonstrate that artificial versions of Rick can be created through different methods. Organic memory constructs arise naturally from how brains store and process information about people. Digital simulation constructs arise artificially from how computers model behavior based on programming. Both methods produce versions of Rick that function similarly to the original. Both methods prove that Rick's personality, intelligence, and behavior patterns can be replicated by systems other than Rick's original biological brain. This replication ability suggests something profound about the nature of consciousness and identity in the Rick and Morty universe. End quote. That minds are patterns which can be instantiated in multiple substrates, whether organic memory, digital simulation, clone bodies, or other artificial systems. The show consistently returns to this theme across multiple episodes and storylines, using Rick variants to explore questions about what makes someone truly themselves versus merely a copy of themselves. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.